Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Political Compass Discord server. Just a disclaimer right now, we're not associated with the Reddit, but we are affiliated with the Political Compass Instagram. And welcome to Vaush and Euron, our debaters for today, and we're going to be your mods, Din.
And Big Weld. So for another disclaimer, as moderators, we're not going to interject militantly within the debate. So basically, we're going to keep things from getting out of hand.
That seems fair to me. I don't know how this Discord Spaces thing works. Should I turn my camera on? Can I? Is that even a thing I can do?
You're not able to.
No, you can't.
Gotcha. Okay, whatever. You know, soapbox.
Most people will be watching your stream anyway.
Oh, if they're very nice and kind, sure.
All right. So with that said, we're gonna go to our first topic. To what extent do Native Americans have a more legitimate claim to any piece of land that they do not currently occupy than any other American?
Vaush, do you want to go ahead and start, or do you want me to take the lead?
Which would you prefer?
I'm happy starting.
Go for it.
Sure. Generally speaking, I don't think that Native Americans have a more legitimate claim to any piece of territory, of course, that they do not currently possess, and not in this individual sense, but they don't, as a group, have a more legitimate claim to any territory than, any regular non-Native American. I think it's just a matter of history. I think it's just a matter of many different factors that contribute to the fact that, yes, they are underprivileged. However, I don't think it is justified. Movements like land back are justified. That's my take.
Gotcha. Nice and easy. Well, I would actually agree with you. I don't think that Native Americans have any more a right to the land that we all live in than anyone else does. I think it's simply a question of which policies and which systems we can implement to give everyone possible the best possible lives. I think you can also make a pretty strong argument for legal precedence here, given the number of treaties and contracts which were violated in our dealings with Native American groups. Much of Land Back isn't about who has the right to land. It's about what legal claims, which we already recognize, should we pay greater attention to, which allowances should be made within those legal claims, and what can we do to work with the systems we have right now to make them better for everyone at their behest.
I completely understand that. Regarding the signed treaties, for example, I would say they are not very relevant by today's standards. Most of these signed treaties with the Native Americans, the U.S. government signed, they were over 100 years ago. They were many years ago. And sincerely, to be frank, no one today holds a legitimate, no one today was alive back then to be directly influenced. That's, of course, I'm not discarding the fact that, yes, they are underprivileged for, in part, those reasons, as well as other systematic reasons. However, yes, generally, I do not agree with the fact that, with that whole idea.
It's always interesting to me, the priorities we take when it comes to issues like this. There's plenty of case law, for example, of wrongs which have taken place in the distant past, especially with regards to maybe a corporation, a family lineage, where disputes which happened a long time ago, can be settled now through restitution, through court battle. It seems like we give allowance to this through petty crimes, but great crimes, the extermination of an entire collection of civilizations. That's like a we need to move on sort of thing. Now, I'll admit, and I'll be the first to admit, many of the treaties which we violated are not ones we can fairly restore now. Because if we were to say, give Native Americans all the land which they were promised, that would put tens of millions of American citizens now under the purview of a government which they did not, essentially consent to be under. It would be a revocation of their democratic rights. There are conflicting interests here. But where we can recognize these treaties, where we can give restitution, give reparations in ways that don't hurt others, that don't tread on the rights of others, I think that's something at least worth looking into, and there are many treaties that that can be given that attention.
So pragmatically speaking, what would be your proposal to solve this, this issue of disadvantage we see between non-Native Americans and Native Americans? What would be your proposal, perhaps instituting some form of government program? Or do you think that directly, perhaps taking federal land and putting it in their hands is something viable?
Solve, that's a difficult one. So a couple of key points that I often hear from land back activists are this. First of all, many Native people argue they should be given more control and autonomy over resources which the federal government has extracted from land that they nominally control, or at the very least, they should get a better cut of it, you know. There are arguments to be made for direct reparations to Native settlements because um, many of the reservations we have in this country are just like disgustingly poor. I mean, dirt poor, which is a
Yes.
direct product of the economic ostracization we inflicted on them by killing off, you know, and stealing a tremendous amount of their material power and then consigning them to these like little tracts of land where they had no cultural ties and no real avenue for redevelopment. You know, stuff like that. In terms of solving the problem, very difficult to do, but addressing the problem, there are absolutely things on the table which can be moved forward.
Well, now that you mention reservations, actually, I wanted to touch upon that. I do not agree with reservations. I just want to say that. I do not think that it is very constitutional or it is very lawful to have certain groups of people under certain laws. That does not mean that I am not in favor of affirmative action programs, but I do not think that is just at all with the rest of the American population to have, for example, natives be subject only to federal and reservation law and not state law. I think that is that just contributes to that is just to put it simply, it's not fair. However, that also contributes to a general it contributes to a reaction from the American public that is not what is going to be desired. If you start, distributing certain rights, certain abilities to certain groups, I don't think that's going to be good. Now, of course, reservations are already in place, but in my opinion, they should be, these territories should be integrated into the rest of the states as would be any normal piece of territory.
So your potential solution to the reservation problem would simply be to abolish them and incorporate these territories as towns and provinces under the United States government?
Absolutely.
I think there are potential benefits that solution could provide. However, I think that if that is the direction we're to take, it should be done with the democratic consent of the natives who could be incorporated. After all, this would have to be done for them, not us. It would be better for us, the United States, to incorporate these territories fully, to destroy the concept of the reservation, to have all land within its borders under its control. But we're not doing this for us. If we're doing it for them, they need to want it. Because there are also negative consequences at hand here and a kind of implicit coercion. Sure, incorporating them and making them a regular part of the United States may have its benefits, but a lot of that is also because the system we've set them up under is so bad. It's very much an my way or the highway situation. Maybe if reservations were amended, reformed somehow, given better opportunities, then it would be an easier choice for many Native people. They would prefer to stay in those reservations than they would to just be incorporated and assimilated. Hello?
I think he's thinking.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I love thinking.
It's good for you.
Well, while he's thinking, how are you folks doing?
Oh, splendid. How are you, Vaush?
I'm doing okay. Been having a lot of fun with Elden Ring. A lot of damage to my sleep schedule, but that's life.
You're on, you there?
I'm sorry?
You're on. We can't hear you. Yeah, I think it's mic trouble right now.
No worries. I'm not going anywhere.
Can you hear me now? No,
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Hello.
Okay, great. I don't know. There was like a split for a split second. The power was out in my house. I don't know why.
Ain't nothing.
Yeah, I'm gonna reconnect on my computer. Just give me like 15 seconds.
So yeah, Elden Ring. Really good game, as it turns out. Oh, I'll do this one way, don't worry. I've always been a fan of the From Software games, but this is the first time I've gotten to play one as it's released and participate in the sort of, cultural hype. Also, Elden Ring's like 10 times as popular as any preceding game from Software, so there's way, way, way more of a, cultural wave to ride. And it's nice because, the game incorporates multiplayer elements that kind of feed into that hype with the bloodstains and the, you know, the phantoms and the player left messages, and it does make it feel like a remarkably communal experience, which softens out some of the perceived unfairness in the more difficult areas.
All right.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so I'm going to try to respond to what I heard. You can clarify if I'm misunderstanding your argument.
Of course.
I do believe that. I differ from you in the fact that I don't believe that it is up to the natives or up to the people in the reservation is a better word. It's a better way to put it. It's not up to the natives if they decide to be in the reservations or not. I think something more adequate would be perhaps holding a statewide vote. I don't know if it should be like a federal at a federal level or at a nationwide level, but I do not believe that. I think it's not just a matter of whether the natives will benefit from this, because I already view the concept of reservations as intrinsically, unjust. I believe that segregating people into these communities is, well, of course, it's something negative, but puts them at perhaps a privilege or an unprivilege compared to regular Americans, where they will have, certain laws, and I don't think that is very aligned with the nation's ideas. And my main reason for this is a topic that I'm sure we'll discuss further on, which is the idea of multiculturalism and assimilationism and just homogeneity in general. I do not think that having special rights and having special areas where you allocate people is effective. And to be frank, I don't think that even if it did marginally, in my opinion, unbenefit natives, for example, I don't think that that would be much of an issue so long as it was, of course, democratically held. At the end of the day, the country is a democracy.
Of course. But it's really not up to us. I mean, we have a federalist system after all. You talk about different people in different areas of the country being privileged to different rules, but we have that already. Different counties, different cities, and different states all have different laws themselves. There are colonies outside the United States that have different laws, like Puerto Rico, that don't benefit from all the same protections as a member of the contiguous United States, the 50 states. Might, like with regards to their participation in the democratic process. The boundary which separates these reservations, I don't think it's any different fundamentally from boundaries which separate county lines, city lines, state lines. But if we were to ask what to do with a city or a state, we would defer that vote to that city or to that state. I don't see why, in a conversation about what we should do with a reservation, we would defer it to the entire state. A reservation has very few people on it relative to the population of the state it's within. I mean, essentially, the native vote there would be negligible. It wouldn't even be, it would be essentially a rounding error with the decision going to everyone else who's not directly affected. I think one of the important parts of democratic federalism, the idea of like delegating this down, is that people can make decisions about the laws that affect them directly. And no one is affected by the reservation laws more directly than native people. I think it should be left up to them.
I think my main issue with this is the fact that reservations were historically made to contain natives, and currently, well, of course, they do have larger populations of natives. That's my main issue, because in my eyes, that is, I wouldn't want to say the logic of an ethno-nationalist or anything like that. I mean, that would be a stretch. However, I would like to say that it is a form of, it's trying to group populations by the idea itself and the current results we are seeing, how we see it today. It's an idea that tries to group populations, ethnicities, and nationalities, or tribes, whatever you want to call it, into certain groups. And I think that's just not part of what America should be. I don't think that's really part of what America is, generally speaking. I think that we have certain lines that, of course, they broadly allow. The concept of the state is one, or the province is one that is, of course, an administrative one primarily. And I think it just applies. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to have these communes or these small sectors where you have populations evidently classified put there by their tradition, by their origin. It would be like having for example, it would be like having a separate state or a separate community for the Amish people, or for, I don't know, perhaps certain Asian populations in certain cities.
We do.
I think it's just something that, at the end of the day, would lead to disintegration of the American identity in a way, and it would just not contribute to the social cohesion of the country.
The Amish do have specific provincial laws. They're given exemptions by the government. They do have those.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I was not aware of that. But then I'm against that as well. Then.
Um, the Amish are there more or less of their own accord. The natives are not. I am in principle, I'm in favor of what you're referring to here. The idea of these, sort of these holdovers, these groups of ethnic distinction. I understand there are problems with these, but right now they are problems which negatively affect only one group of people, and that is the natives. Americans who are not native are not negatively affected by the existence of these reservations. Much to the opposite, the existence of these reservations is a legacy of the exploitation of native people. We benefited from the systems that put them on those reservations. So if this was some mutually destructive process, some, political legacy that was harming anyone and everyone involved, then I would agree with you fully. But at the moment, the systems that exist are harming the natives pretty much exclusively. And if abolishing these systems, just as is right now, without their democratic consent, would make things worse for them, we wouldn't really be solving the problem. We may have some kind of abstract ideological victory, but if the practical outcome of that ideological victory is that the people most harmed by that unfair system are then harmed further, it seems to me like a hollow one at best. It may well be the case that someday the reservation system is abolished. I hope it is.
Yeah.
It's not a great one. But if it is to be abolished, I think it must be done in a way which is in line with the will of the Native American people and in a way which directly benefits them. It can't just be some haphazard, cleaning up the mistakes of the past type deal.
So what you're saying right now, in my opinion, at least, it sort of aligns with the logic of self-determinism. This nation wants this nation considers this to be best for itself. But I'd like to ask you a question. What would be your response in the case of, for example, maybe the Pacific Northwest or a percentage, a piece of land of white people or maybe of black people, that's irrelevant, saying, you know what, we want to have our own laws, we want to change how we do things dramatically if that's necessary for the exemplification. What would be your opinion on that? Because it appears to me that the logic that you're using would very, very easily follow through with this idea of self-determinism.
We already can. I live in the Pacific Northwest. We live in states that have a right to pass laws which exclusively affect the people in our own territory. We do have a degree of autonomous political control.
That is, it is true that you, of course, have this degree. Of course, that's part of the country itself. That's part of the federal model. However, I think that it just boils down to this ethnic control of a particular territory. That is what I have an issue with, and I think that
it's just important to remember.
I don't agree. I don't really agree with having reservations have special laws. Maybe if the reservation was like a state, its own state, then I would say like, yeah, sure. I mean, so long as it follows with how the rest of the states do it, then yeah, that's completely fine. But reservations are exempt from following state law, of course.
Well, right. So they're a special legal designation, but that seems to me somewhat arbitrary, no? Like, you'd be okay with all these differences if they were incorporated into statehood, but because they have a special designation which gives them legal autonomy, that's somehow more illegitimate. I'm very sensitive to the ethnostate, debacle here, but it's important to know where the power comes from. The power of reservations is not a power of Native Americans keeping every other ethnic group out. I'm pretty sure you can live on a reservation if you're not native. I mean, there's a lot of variants. There's a lot of reservations. It's not like they shoot whiteys who come across the border. Yeah. But it's not their power to keep people out. It has historically been the power of the U.S. government to keep them in. And what remains is this tiny, fragile vestige of what cultural, remnants they still have. It's hardly like a bulwark of ethno-nationalism. Again, I understand the ideological concerns, but in practice, this must be amended in a way which doesn't harm Native people further.
Okay, I see what you mean. Now I'd like to ask you another question. This sort of deviates a bit, but at least it's related to the land back movement.
I love deviance.
What do you think about the proposal of removing Mount Rushmore?
I suppose I'd be fine with it. I understand it's on like a stolen land, right? Well, I suppose everything's on stolen land.
Yeah.
It's on more
A spiritual land,
explicitly.
yeah.
Right, right. I suppose I'd be fine with that. It was pretty insensitive to put it up there. Frankly, it's also a very mid monument, you know. I'm sure we could do something a lot better.
Mm,
Now, politically, obviously, that's never going to happen. It's going to stay up for as long as the rock doesn't erode, you know. I'm not saying that we should, like, fight for its removal, but, you know, if it was like a 50-50 issue, you know, it was, like, politically viable, yeah, why not?
do you think that should be exclusively up to the? I believe it's located in South Dakota. Do you think that that should be exclusively up to the people of South Dakota, or do natives have a bigger say because it was their spiritual land, their ancestral land, sorry, or do you think it's like up to who?
Well, I think that monument is specifically on federal land, so that would probably be a federal decision. I don't think it should be specifically up to the Native Americans because, again, if we deferred to them the political autonomy to decide everything on land that was stolen from them, then they really would run the United States, and that seems a bit impractical for a few reasons. Also, then we would have to hate them as leftists because they would be the head of the United States, and that seems awkward. But in terms of like practical decision making here, like I think that we should listen to their concerns and complaints, and as American citizens, we should take into account those concerns when deciding whether or not we should keep that ugly son of a bitch up there.
Okay, well, okay, I guess that's pretty reasonable. I personally don't agree with the removal. Even if it were like politically viable, I would still like try to advocate for it not being removed. But yeah, I mean that covers it. I don't know if the mods want to propose another, pass on to the next issue or.
Yeah, we have some other stuff that we wanted to interject for the conversation. So, wanted just to put this out there, whatever your takes are on it. Are multicultural societies superior or inferior to homogeneous societies?
Do you want to start, Vaush?
Sure, why not? Are multicultural societies inferior spirit? Well, obviously, it would depend on the metrics you're using for inferiority or superiority. I think that multiculturalism in the modern world today is an inevitable product of cultural and economic trends that are as close to objectively good as you can get. You know, like, we're obviously, like, the metrics for what good and bad are is going to vary, but I think that if you want a society full of people who are happier, healthier, have a greater range of media and culture to explore, who have more freedom, you know, metrics like that, which I hope most of us would agree are good, I think that, yes, what we call multiculturalism, I suppose free trade and the ability to travel between borders is absolutely something we should fight for.
I tend to disagree on this. I do believe that, yes, I do agree that multiculturalism is sort of derived from these other conditions that are in place, this form of economic globalization. I definitely agree with that. However, I do think that I mean, when I look at history, when I analyze the patterns, when I look at, different things, I do believe that homogeneous societies tend to be superior. They tend to be much more consolidated than, and by superior, of course, that is subjective. By superior, I mean, I do think they tend to have better living for their people. I do think that they tend to have, a more consolidated culture, an idea that, a more functional state. I think that's the what I'm trying to get at. I do think that homogeneous societies are better in that sense than multicultural societies. My issue with multicultural societies, at least as we can see in Europe, with the growing trends of mass immigration, is the fact that, so societies base themselves off social capital and off trust. And social capital, I read this on someone had a take on this. When social capital can be spent and can be accumulated, and when you have a society that doesn't trust each other, people in societies that don't trust each other to the same extent, you start to, waste, or not waste, but you start to spend this social capital to a point where eventually you're not going to have a very respectful society. You're going to have a society, filled with violence, filled with law breaking, people disagreeing, and I don't think that's socially healthy at all.
Okay. I suppose the issue that I have here is that a lot of these categories we're looking to determine are very subjective and therefore very difficult to get really good data on. But there are some here that we can objectively find data on, and all of them support my arguments. So in terms of social capital, or I guess let's refer to economic productivity. Free trade and free movement across borders is an objective marker of an improved economic productivity. It's fairly unambiguous. There's no way around that. In terms of violence, immigrants commit less violence in the United States than native-born citizens do. In fact, it takes a few generations for immigrants' children to catch up to native-born Americans in terms of the average amount of violence committed. Violence and lawbreaking broadly, even illegal immigrants, I'm pretty sure, if you exclude the entering the country, without documentation, on average have lower levels of committed violence than domestic citizens. I guess the narrative that I'm interested in looking at here is like, I don't know what exactly we're referring to. When we take a look at like homogeneous or heterogeneous societies, what metrics are we using? Race, ethnicity? There's not a large or powerful country on earth at any point in all of human history that hasn't had significant social rifts within it, Back during the founding of the United States, right after we kicked off the British, the founding fathers were bemoaning the ethnic invasion of the swarthy Germans. Nowadays, we think of the Germans as essentially, at least in a racial sense, identical to Americans, or I guess British people or French, or we just think white Western European. But back then, not really. They thought pretty ill of them. It seems like these metrics for social division, we're always looking to find them, and I just don't see how excluding people from your country is going to make that country any better.
That is true what you're saying, that the concept of white has shifted, and the concept of this like mainstream American culture has integrated aspects of many different cultures. However, the thing is, how do I put this? When this is more of a long-term plan, yes, these minority, well, I don't want to call these immigrants, it's a better term, they do tend to assimilate over time. That is true. And what you say about crime, those crime statistics is true as well, from what I've heard, from what I've read. However, in the immediate sense, it does tend to, not benefit the country. For example, when you have, let's talk about Britain, for example. When you have immigrants coming in from the third world, right? Initially, they have drastically different cultures, and they do tend to clash. They do tend to ghettoify.
Wait, excuse me? If I may, let's be very specific. Yeah. The third world. Let's be specific. What do you mean?
The third world, I mean, countries not in the developing world. I mean, sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, parts of Latin America, I mean, parts of the Arab world. That's generally what I'm referring to.
It's just, that seems like a very, very, very broad group of people. It sounds like you're just saying non-white, basically.
No, not really, because I mean, I wouldn't consider a country like Ukraine or Russia to be part of the first world. And I do think that their immigrants, for example, Polish people or Eastern Europeans in Britain, do cause similar, effects to what other people cause, to what people from Nigeria or Jamaica cause, for example.
Let's work within this example. Do you prefer to use the UK or America? Are you from the UK? Is there just a preference in terms of which framework?
No, I would prefer to use the UK because it has seen more recent trends of immigration and that sort of thing coming from, these different parts of the world.
All right. So I guess I would ask, what is the issue exactly? So sometimes people from very poor countries come in, and there are problems associated with the fact that they're from poor countries. What's the issue with that?
Okay, the issue is that when people come from these poor countries, of course, you're going to recognize, I believe, that due to the socioeconomic conditions these people are placed in, they're going to develop drastically different cultures and drastically different behaviors. For example, if my country is very poor, then, people are going to tend to be more likely to steal. That's an example just for you.
Wait,
when you bring these
may I harp
people,
on that? Because I want to know. I just want to explore all of these. Yeah. So you say they'll produce different cultures based on the socioeconomic situation. There are already tens of millions of poor people in the UK and in the United States. Why?
That is true. However, the poor people in the United States are nowhere near comparable to the poor people in Brazil.
That is true. The poor people in Brazil, when they come to the U.S., commit less crime than the poor people in the United States. The poor people
in Brazil are much
better.
poorer than the poor people in America.
And all the same, they commit less crime when they come up to the United States. If anything, we should be benefiting from their cultural influence in that respect.
Well, Well, in terms of the United States, I have seen the statistics you've seen as well. However, I have seen contradictory statistics. And in terms of the UK, I don't mean to pull like a 1350 or anything, because not all Black people in the UK are immigrants, of course. Well, not currently. I mean, they're like third, fourth generation immigrants, of course. But and that's actually one of the points I wanted to get at. So these people that have already assimilated, they already there's no problem with them. I don't see any problem with them. My problem comes.
Do you mean poor people who are like ethnically English, or do you mean immigrants who have come and who have already sort of integrated culturally?
By these people, I mean immigrants who have. I know that phrase is like not very well seen, but yeah, I mean like people who have already integrated, like third, fourth, second generation immigrants.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what's the issue, I suppose?
Yeah, when you have these new groups of people, like refugees coming from Syria, for example, a war-torn nation, or people coming from Somalia, or people coming from fucking, I don't know, like Romania. I'm sorry about Romania. You're going to have much higher rates of crime, and that is something that can be demonstrably proven. For example, and I know this, once again, I know this case, the exact example I'm going to bring up is one that's used by, reactionaries and conservatives a lot. However, the case of Sweden, for example, it has seen dramatic increases in violent crime as different groups like refugees from Syria have arrived to the country. I think that just shows what this means. And it's not only sustained by pure statistics like the ones that I could present to you. I have at hand. However, it's also sustained by the people living there.
Oh, sure.
Excuse me?
It should be noted, though.
Yeah, it's also sustained by the people living there. They have ghettoified the police reports on this.
Well, hold on, wait.
Just,
if I may,
sure.
I like that term ghettoified because the implication is that it's something they do as opposed to it being a policy of the state. So Germany took in far more migrants during the Syrian refugee crisis than Sweden did. Far, far, far more. And after doing so, their crime rate decreased. They took, so many more. Additionally, when studies were done on crimes committed by Syrian refugees, it was found that overwhelmingly these were petty crimes committed against each other, which makes sense because they were all in refugee camps. I mean, buddy, trust me, put me in a refugee camp. I will be doing petty crimes all over the place. It's not the best environment for keeping, your hands to yourself. It seems like a lot of what happened in Sweden, and I'm no expert on this, by the way, it seems like what happened in Germany is an indication that the presence of a lot of refugees doesn't inherently suddenly explode crime in your country. Instead, it poses a socioeconomic challenge that different states may respond to with different levels of competence. Germany handled it pretty darn well. Now, keep in mind, a refugee is not an immigrant. Refugees are things that not things, of course, they're people, but a refugee is something that a country takes on as goodwill. Like, there's destruction taking place nearby, like we will attempt to help, we will help people. An immigrant is obviously just subject to natural processes. We would expect crime to go up when refugees come to our countries because they're a difficulty that we're assuming, but we're doing it because it makes the world a better place. I think it is true that there were crimes committed by refugees, but if anything, I think what happened in Europe was a startling testament to our strength as a sort of civic society, the ability to absorb millions of people forced out of their country by war and destitution to give them better lives. This isn't a sign of weakness or something to be avoided. This is a sign of overwhelming strength. That was one of the defining moments, I think, of, the value of our political governance, I guess, of liberal democracies, that we can afford that, we can bear that. And, the children of those refugees are going to be, on average, higher IQ and lower crime rate committing than average German or Sweden or whatever else citizens if they follow the patterns of immigrants that came to the United States. So I think it's a good thing. I think we should celebrate it.
Well, I'd like to ask you a very, a more theoretical question about this. Given how I know that you're not an essentialist and neither am I, we both believe that, cultural conditions, the way people are raised influences how they act. Don't you think, it appears to me that it appears evident to me that when you have people who have been raised in countries where violence is more prominent, where they're put in these conditions that are much harsher to them, it appears to me obvious that when they move somewhere else, they're going to continue those practices. And yes, over time, and as they integrate into these new societies, that will start to drop. I absolutely agree. But instantly, I don't think that is the case. And I'm sure you can pull up other examples. I can pull up other examples as well, like rape cases in Germany. I can pull up examples of crimes committed by, I think it was Moroccan, or I don't know, I think it was Moroccan, yeah. People coming in to Spain and Italy in different areas. I think it's just very obvious to see how there's going to be a cultural clash, and how there's going to be this issue
What
where
cultural
people
clash?
have been raised, yeah, and where people have been raised in these conditions, they're gonna, continue practicing them on where they move.
Well, practicing what?
Violence, for example. No, I'm not generalizing everyone, of course, but the trends. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, maybe this is just a cultural difference, but the United States is the world's #1 source of violence, as far as I'm concerned. We kill a lot of people over here. Should I fear the violent culture of an immigrant when we in America have more firearm deaths than just about any other developed country? The United Kingdom, of course, you all don't have guns over there, but I guess it's just, if you want to pick and choose, if you want to selectively analyze different groups of people at, very particular points in time for relative crime rates, you could make any group of people look bad at some point. But the broad trend, if we take a step back and look broadly, what are the outcomes produced by people of different cultures, nations, ethnicities, races, nationalities entering liberal democracies? The outcomes overwhelmingly have been positive ones. And the real difference we see long term is not a distinction between which cultures or ethnicities we're talking about, but rather who the haves and have-nots turn out to be, which is why the most deprived, of all resources group in the US isn't some immigrant group, it's Black people, because they directly suffer from centuries of exploitative political systems. They're not immigrants. Most Black people in America can trace their family lineage not very far for obvious reasons, but if they could,
Yeah.
they'd be able to trace them back farther than most of the white people here in the US. So immigration doesn't seem to be the issue here. It's exploitative political practices. It's discrimination. It's, you say ghettoize, but what is a ghetto? A ghetto is a product of policy. The Nazis ghettoified their political enemies in Poland after marching on in there. It was a deliberate policy to cordon, to round up, to force out certain
But
groups
it
of
is
people.
true. It is true, however, that when people move to a new country, a new culture, they do. I'm going to mention two ideas which are true, and I don't have the statistics at hand for either of these, but I think you might have heard of them, and I mean, from what I know, they are true. So first of all, when people move from one country to another, they tend to become more nationalistic for the country they left, which is pretty funny, but it does happen to be the case. And also, when people move, for example, you have people from Hong Kong moving to San Francisco, the most likely scenario is that those people, or a very likely scenario is that some of those people are going to integrate into the Chinatowns or into the, communities that have already been built there by those people that surround them. It's very logical, and I think that it's just representative of what I'm trying to say. These people,
we made
people tend to
Chinatown.
group them. Excuse me?
People don't group themselves. The reason Chinatowns exist in the United States, especially on the West Coast, is because Chinese people were subjected to a massive amount of historical discrimination.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for safety, they would speak with and try to work with people who shared their language, who wouldn't attack them in the night, who wouldn't, spit at them on the street. Our discrimination forced them into the ghettos they still live in today. We can choose to not do that, and we know we can because poor Irish and Italian immigrants originally were a part of those ghettos. They shared the exact same tenements that Black people did out in New York and Chicago and what have you. But when we decided that the Italian and Irish people should be treated better, that they should be considered part of us whiteys, all of a sudden they started getting, better paying jobs. They started moving into different neighborhoods because we gave them the right to. They were no longer being attacked or discriminated against every time they left the little bubble of the city they'd carved out for themselves. We can fix the ghettoization problem.
So let me throw something into this real quick. So do you think that this is because of a product of auto segregation is happening by default? That's happening in these areas, just different cultures starting to collect and go together, or is it just a policy thing? Because these are groups of people that are white, and it becomes easier to go and accept them as they blur the lines.
I think that there is, by default, some level of auto-segregation that'll take place, especially from a country with different languages. But if we take a look at the history of the United States, there are ethnic and national groups that have stayed in their ghettos and ones that have not. And the difference is pretty clear. The ones that have are members of historically discriminated groups, and the ones that haven't are the ones that eventually got incorporated into our broader understanding of who the hegemon should include.
And I don't disagree with this. I don't disagree with this. I do think that, the ideas that the country has about who's white, who's not, who's part of this privileged class, this racially or whatever privileged class, I do agree with the fact that does affect how people settle, the patterns that they show. However, I think this isn't against my point. I think that this just proves that assimilation is what matters here. So a multicultural society is a society where there's going to be discrimination between groups. I think it's a society where people are going to be subject.
Do you think culturally heterogeneous societies don't engage in discrimination?
Well, who are they going to discriminate?
Well, I don't think there is such a thing as a culturally heterogeneous society. I think they continue to form lines and divisions within their own society. Keep in mind, like, a ton of Jewish people in Germany were ethnically German. They'd lived in Germany for centuries, longer than my family's lived in the United States. And for a lot of people, in some groups, in some areas, that no longer mattered. And then, all of a sudden, it did. We've had that happen over and over. I think that people who are inclined toward discrimination will always find victims of discrimination they're willing to create. And never in the history of any developed society has bigotry or discrimination as a concept been solved because we simply got rid of the people we were discriminating against. That has never happened anywhere at any point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a very interesting point, I have to say. I mean, yeah, that is very interesting. But I would say that, for example, this, I do think that when, for example, right now we're witnessing trends of Asians, for example, being incorporated into the large white body, the white mainstream body, if you understand what I'm trying to say. They are, in the same way that Italians were incorporated and Irish people and Germans at some point were incorporated, Asians are being incorporated, and I'm sure that as they start to incorporate themselves, or as they start to be incorporated, assimilated, whatever it is, things are going to start to calm down. I don't think that it's very intrinsic for humans to, or for hating people to just find a group of people to point at. I think that there must be distinctions, and those distinctions generally tend to be cultural, of course.
Well, but there are no cultural distinctions between myself and like a person living in Chinatown that don't also exist between myself and like an American Southerner living in Georgia. See, you talk about cultural distinctions as though they're only a product of ethnic differences, but travel the breadth of the United States and you'll find, hell, in the UK, Londoners are nothing like Northern English people. And if we're talking about like the UK broadly, you take a look at Wales and Scotland and all up and over, there are cultural differences whether or not you're pulling from the same ethnic group.
This is true. I definitely agree with this. But what I want to point out with what you just said is the fact that when you have something like a Chinatown, a small community of people living right beside people with, well, not completely, but fairly different cultures, of course, there's going to be a shock that's going to be felt. There's going to be a conflict that's going to be felt that is going to be much larger than what you, a person from the Pacific Northwest, is going to feel when interacting with a person from the South. And the reason for that is because you don't live in the South. You don't live anywhere close to the South. So for there to be a clash between the Pacific Northwest white subculture and the Southern white subculture or whatever, that would be much harder than for there to be a clash between you, assuming that you lived in San Francisco, for example, and Asian Americans, not all Asian Americans, but people with these cultural characteristics.
I have to say, it was a mistake of you to pull upon my lived experience. I grew up in Beverly Hills, but next to it is Koreatown, and never anywhere else in the world are you going to find a sharper divide in income. And I had friends from Koreatown who I got along with, spectacularly. But I have spent time in the South. See, my grandparents live in Florida, northern Florida, as far away from Miami as you can get. A lot of drawl out there. And I have to say, there are far more cultural differences between me and a Floridan Southerner than there will ever be between somebody who lives in Koreatown next to myself. And those are two very different living circumstances as well. Beverly Hills and Koreatown are two very, very different places to grow up.
Who do you think has a more difference, though? Do you think that you have a more difference? You have a bigger difference when compared to a Southerner, for example, or to the Mexican immigrant community that lives next door in LA, for example? Because I would say I would suggest that
I have far
the
more of a
population
difference than the Southerner.
I would suggest that the population that is Catholic, the population that comes from another country, the population that has different customs, the population that speaks Spanish, of course. Not to generalize, but just in certain communities that is the case, and of course live in very different economic conditions.
They're Catholic, but I'm atheist. So my Protestant Southern. Well, hold on, because it seems like you're assuming a lot of similarities between me and Southerners. So Mexican immigrants tend to be Catholic, but Southerners tend to be Protestant, and I'm neither. So that's not any more of a difference. Mexican
I tried to use you as an example, but of course, you're very progressive, so there probably is going to be a massive clash between you and
I'm a person who grew up in LA.
South, right?
As a person who grew up in LA, I find that I have a lot in common with people who grew up in LA. See, one of the strongest cultural values in Los Angeles is tolerance for other cultures. If you don't have that, you don't get to live in LA. It's not really a question or a choice. So you say, folks in the South speak English, but people who immigrate from Mexico speak Spanish. Well, so do like 2/3 of the people in LA. That's hardly exclusive to Mexican immigrants. You say you talk about cultural values. Well, I had Mexican friends who were second-generation immigrants, but I didn't really have many Southern friends when I went down to Florida, even though I spent months over there.
And it just so happens to be the case that in these large metropolitan, diverse areas, there are higher rates of crime and there are lower rates of trust between people.
Well, hold on. That's the case in every major city on Earth, no matter what the ethnic constituency of that city is. Of course, it's a big city.
I would tend to disagree with that.
You can tend to disagree with it if you like, but it remains the case.
Of course there is going to be a higher rates of crime. However, these crime rates are exaggerated by the fact that there is cultural diversity to such a great extent.
You keep saying this.
And a lack of, and of course I'm speaking culturally here, not racially.
No, I need to correct this misconception of yours.
When compared to a city that does
guys,
not.
Guys, one at a time, please.
I just want to say, cultural diversity doesn't create crime. There are sociological studies in which factors create crime. Income inequality is the one. That's the overwhelming one. The force of income inequality in leading to crime is so overwhelming that it blurs out all the other potential variables. That's the big one. Cities are going to have the most income inequality anywhere and everywhere on Earth. You want to go to Russia? Plenty of Russian cities are far more ethnically homogenous than Los Angeles, massively so, and they have far more crime than we do, and a lot of that is a product of the economic policies which led to the breakup of the Soviet Union and the divvying up of public enterprise by oligarchs. It is about factors, yes, but controllable factors, not immigration. Now, oftentimes, cities that have lots of immigrants will also have lots of income inequality because, well, under capitalism, blah-de-blah, role of the worker, and so on. But these are correlative, not causative. You can get rid of the immigrants, but you're not going to get rid of the income inequality. And you'll know that because you can take a look at American cities basically at any point in all of American history, and you'll find the same basic patterns. In fact, crime today, in terms of our perceived murder rates, is like 1/10 what it used to be back in like 1400s France. And in 1400s France, I assure you, that was about as ethnically homogenous as you're going to get any society relative to what we have today. It's just culture doesn't produce these problems. It's other things that we can fix. Kicking immigrants out ain't going to fix it.
Do you think there is, for example, a correlation, and once again, this is going to sound like a very harsh argument, but do you think there is, for example, a correlation between the extent to which America has become a more culturally, or in this case, I'm actually going to go straight forward with it, racially, and this is because, there are correlations between race and culture, not intrinsic, but they're just socially speaking, there are correlations. Do you think that there is... Because from what I've seen, for example, there is a much higher, as America has become less homogenous, the population of people in jail and incarcerated has gone up drastically. And I'm not going to say that the justice system isn't at all biased based on race and based on culture, because I do think it is. However, I don't think it's anywhere near as biased to explain for these differences. And I have a chart if you would like me to employ the data.
We're not going to bring that into this right now. Otherwise, we'll just get caught up in a
So I'm
mass
familiar
of
with
charts and graphs and everything right now.
I'm familiar with whatever data you could provide. Crime skyrocketed in the United States after the drug war started for reasons directly a product of federal policy. And this also speaks against your argument because Black Americans culturally are as American as you can get. I mean, they've been here literally since before the beginning. My family didn't come here until the early 1900s. What you're talking about right now is a racial difference, which kind of, I think, gives light to the pretense of this being about like nationality and whether or not it's about non-white countries versus white countries. Like I've said, you know, there are plenty of cultural differences already within the borders of the United States before we even bring immigration in to the factor. If you want to start splitting hairs on that, you've got urban versus rural, you've got north versus south, you've got, you know, like the people who live in Maine versus people who live in like New Mexico. You'll never be able to get rid of cultural differences, which is fine because there's no problem. It's nice to live in a culturally diverse society.
Okay, so I see what you mean, and I see what we're trying to say. However, and I do agree with the fact that there is no population that is more American than Black Americans. Of course, they have forged their own identity completely disconnected from their, I guess you could say, African roots. So they are purely American. I would agree. However, what I would like to say to that is that my main argument here is that they are not part of the mainstream culture. They are far away from what is considered mainstream. And of course, this is racist. The fact that, not what I'm saying, of course, I don't think so, but the fact that they are not considered fully American, that they have not integrated despite being here for fucking hundreds of years, is a racist thing. I do agree with that. But it just comes to show that, you know, there is a disparity between, the Black American culture, because I do think Black culture is a thing, and mainstream American culture, which is just broadly speaking white culture.
Isn't Black culture mainstream American culture?
It
If you
has
take a look at
become
most of our
mainstream.
cultural exports, it seems like Black people, if anything, have a disproportionate voice in what American mainstream culture is. The mistake
Well,
you're
it
making,
has.
because I have to correct you, especially if the UK is like your primary. America is special. Multiculturalism is our mainstream culture. For the past century at least, the bedrock of American cultural exports have been a direct product of the fact that we incorporate different cultures and different cultural voices in our community into the stuff that we produce. Obviously, we don't do it fairly or equally, and we don't include all groups, but the principle of diversity, that is our culture, just like how multiculturalism is Los Angeles culture. You know, you can't, like, you'll never be able to find one Los Angeles culture, because if you had one culture in Los Angeles, it wouldn't be Los Angeles culture anymore.
Well, I disagree with that. I don't think that the American culture, I'm speaking in mainstream, I don't think the American culture is just diversity of culture. I think that there is a concrete base of American culture that has founded itself and has developed itself for hundreds of years, and it is evidently there, and I could get
Like
into
what?
some aspects if you wanted. For example, you know, the way people are raised, for example, this is going to sound extremely stupid, but fucking like architecture, that is evidently part of the American experience. You just
What about our
shit like
architecture?
rock music. Excuse me?
Well, what about our architecture is part of the ancestral American tradition that isn't Black culture? Because like neoclassical architecture was a big part of our original founding aesthetic, but we don't really use that anymore. Nowadays, we
agree.
use kind of a
Culture can
hodgepodge
change.
of like post 20th century skyscraper architecture, like colonial, like I don't think you can boil down, like, especially since a huge part of our architectural culture in America stems directly from slavery. I mean, we literally have like plantation style homes, and a ton of our like zoning laws, especially in areas that used to have legalized slavery, and the buildings built on them are direct products of, well, I don't really want to say that slavery is a cultural contribution of Black people. That seems to minimize the harm done a little bit, but at the very least, they were a part of all that. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you take a look at the history of any art form in America, there are going to be influences from so many different cultural groups, you know?
I do think that there are differences. However, I do think that while some, in the same cases, it's the case for immigration, while some influences come from different parts of the world, there is still this consolidated idea, this consolidated culture that gets fed into, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, like
And
what?
yes, excuse me?
Like what do all real Americans agree on? Like what's that root culture?
I mean, aspects of individualism, for example. I mean,
How so?
undeniably, how so? America is the most individualistic society there is. And I think that some groups that come to the United States, for example, Latinos or Latins or whatever, they do tend to be more collectivistic. And
We
I don't,
recite
and
the
I think
Pledge of
that ends up
Allegiance.
feeding into American culture. And I think that their cultural practices will end up feeding into this mainstream American culture as well. However, while it feeds into this greater idea, there will be some conflict.
But we recite the Pledge of Allegiance before class every day as young people. In what way are we, what individualistic value, like what like specific thing is like an America thing that people of different cultures don't believe in? Because Black Americans also believe pretty strongly in individualism as a concept. It's all over the media and the culture that Black people produce. They have a very strong affinity for it. So is that
And
like,
this
is
is the
that, did
case.
they just take that from us or?
No, this is a case where Black Americans do align with white Americans, or I'd like to say mainstream American culture. This is a case where this is true. But when it comes to other groups, that isn't exactly the case. I do not believe, as a Latino person, I do not believe Latinos from Latin America to be nearly as individualistic as are
In what way?
other people. For example, Latinos tend to care more about others' perception of them because society tends to divide itself between two categories. It's called guilt-based society and shame-based society. Shame-based societies are individualistic. Guilt-based societies are collectivistic. I'm pretty sure it's like that.
Right, but aren't we talking about people in America having a shared cultural product? If there are going to be cultural differences between people from different countries, I get that. I'm just wondering what like the root, like what ethnic group in America doesn't believe that, you know? And then you have this dissonance too, because China has its history with like attempting socialism, but
Well,
Chinese immigrants tend to be pretty fiercely individualistic in terms of like them pursuing educational and business attainment. So like I guess the issue here is that like this is an unwinnable problem from your perspective because trying to define American culture in a way that includes Americans broadly but discludes Black culture, like you would have to you're like winding wire around like a thistle branch, and you'll be doing it for days. I don't know if there's a way to negotiate that problem. I guess like even if I granted all of this, I don't see what the issue is with having different cultures in a country, especially since it seems to be inevitable given the fact that white Americans in the South and white Americans in New York whose families both arrived here from like the same boat, um like they have vastly different cultures, you know?
because they've assimilated to different regions and different subcultures over time. That's things that can happen. I believe that, for example, if a Latin American family moved to the US, right, I believe they would have these cultural characteristics which would, broadly speaking, define them as more collectivistic than a white American family that has been there since whatever. It's irrelevant how
Is
long they've
that
been there,
bad
just
then?
for a long
Isn't
time.
that good?
But the case is that as the children of the Latin American family begin to assimilate, they will tend to, not only will they contribute to the mainstream body of American culture, but they will also they themselves will also start adopting characteristics, and generation after generation there is going to be this process of assimilation where they are completely quote unquote American.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Immigrants will eventually assimilate mostly to the dominant culture, with it
Yeah.
depending largely on region. What's the issue?
Okay, now let me move. Yeah, let me talk about this. Okay, so my issue is the one that I've been talking about for a while, and it is the fact that I believe multicultural societies tend to have less trust between each other, and there is a study to back this up. It's probably been used against you in multiple arguments, but there are studies to back this up, and it suggests that the more multicultural a society is, the less shared values that exist between the people, the less trust there will be. And I mean, you could see this stuff reflected in, for example, how people, if people lock their doors, for example, or if people don't lock their doors, that's just an example of their houses. That's just an example because people have more trust, less trust.
Is that an issue?
Yeah, I think it's very important for the society to have trust for it to
Isn't
be
that
cohesive.
kind of on the bigoted people? I mean, like, it seems odd to me to go like, well, we can't allow for immigration and cultural differences because people might not trust, you know, like, people already lock their doors in big cities anyway, regardless of the like ethnic constituencies at present there, because it's a big city. Big cities tend to correlate to income inequality and therefore crime. I guess like we can defer to like nebulous characteristics like this, but if I were to follow this logic, then I wouldn't have been an abolitionist back 150 years ago, because I bet you that like white Southerners felt a lot less neighborhood trust after black people got houses in their neighborhood and weren't all like locked up in the cellar.
There's a drastic difference, though. I mean, you're comparing the case of people literally being in like chattel slavery, and then you're comparing it to like bringing people in, which is something that, on the first hand, in my opinion, is a moral obligation, but on the second hand, it's not as necessary to, you know, artificially bring people in. I don't think it's morally necessary.
How are you artificially bringing people in?
Well, by allowing them in is what I'm trying to say.
How is that? Your choice of words here is odd. How is that artificial? People travel. That's just a thing that we do.
Okay, but allowing it.
I think it's more of a poor choice of words rather than it is actually the reality situation. I think it's fake people.
Yeah, it's not. No. It's just a choice of words. That's fine. It's just, I think it's indicative maybe of a thought process here. See, because to me, the default is let anyone do whatever they want. Freedom is the default. And then if you want to make exceptions to that, you have to prove harm. Like, well, does allowing people to murder others help people? Well, no. Okay, fine. You know, like, block it out, you know. And in the case of travel, like, we know that immigration leads to massive economic benefits. It contributes to the right for humanity to travel where men have been, you know, the right to be free, to live where you want. It gives people more like lived experience. It increases cultural diversity, which I just think is a great thing. And like to the idea that we shouldn't do this, we should lock all of this off, like, because some people feel less trustful of ethnic minorities or like national minorities. I don't know. It just seems weird when every like objective metric is beneficial.
Well, so we can talk about this all day. Of course, you already know that I disagree with the fact that I do think that overwhelmingly the cultural implications, the immediate cultural implications are not good. I don't think that it's societally healthy for people to be, you know, half the people to be wearing burqas and the other half to be naked on the street, if you get what I mean. I don't think it's very cohesive, and I don't know.
Wait. I don't know at all what you mean. I'm actually very confused as to what you mean by that.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that when you have a society that is very diverse, there is going to be a loss in trust, and there is going to be less trust in society. People are going to tend to be more disrespectful to each other. There is going to be, marginalization. There's going to be, excuse me?
Do you have any evidence to the idea that countries that ban like immigration are more nice to each other? I just don't want to run off on extrapolations here.
I have evidence of countries that have had Are you speaking right now? Sorry.
No, continue.
Okay. I have evidence of countries that have significantly lowered the amount of immigration they receive, and it just so happens to be the case that they have had less terrorist attacks.
Okay, well, we're not talking about terrorist attacks. Also, which countries?
Well, a terrorist attack is definitely an example of harm.
Which countries?
Poland, for example, when compared to Germany.
Well, okay. Which immigrants?
Immigrants from primarily the Middle East.
Do we mean refugees?
Well, I mean, refugees are by definition immigrants.
No, you can't do that, man. You're going to make me distrust anything that you cite. Those are absolutely two different groups of people.
No.
Refugees are taken en masse by a government as a way of compensating for harm done from geopolitical conflict. Immigrants travel of their own volition. Those are completely different things. Those are absolutely not the same.
No, I'm not trying to group both groups into the same, but definitionally, refugees are anyone who moves from one land to another land
these are
is an
not. You are
immigrant.
deliberately obfuscating data if you do that. It is dishonesty to try to create a blanket term to describe both, to ascribe to legal immigrants the same characteristics that refugees from a war would bring.
Look, I understand what you're trying to say, and I understand that the way I phrased it perhaps made me look like I was acting in bad faith, but I promise you I'm not. I'm just trying to say, just so we can get this out of the way. When I'm referring, excuse me?
No, I apologize. I thought you were done speaking.
Okay, yeah. What I'm trying to say is that, from my understanding, countries like Poland that have received less refugees from war-torn nations like Syria, or none at all, actually, have had drastically lower terrorist attacks than countries that have received more. What I meant to say by the immigrant thing is that, by definition, and please let me finish, and then you feel free to correct me. We have when we generally refer to immigrants, we refer to like economic immigrants mostly, for the most part. However, all economic immigrants are immigrants, and technically all refugees, 99% of refugees are immigrants, given that the definition for an immigrant is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country, and in most cases, they don't return. So that's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, no, I clearly see a distinction between both groups, so don't worry about that.
So they're legally distinct from each other. I'm not just making it up. Like, you can look.
No,
they're considered different things by governments. But anyway,
I agree.
I noticed how I asked you originally a few minutes ago whether there was evidence of countries who blocked off immigration being nicer to each other, and your response was with these like terrorist attack rates in response to the Syrian refugee crisis. These are very different things. The fact is that generally countries that just block immigration from other countries are usually like pretty far right, and they usually have pretty antagonistic attitudes towards ethnic groups within their own country that aren't part of the hegemon, and that usually leads to, like, I don't know, it's not like Nazi Germany suddenly felt like a tremendous swell of kindness for all of the brothers and sisters in arms they had within their country. There was quite a lot of paranoia, distrust, and violence at hand there. And we're talking about such nebulous categories. Like, you're telling me that, like, people from other countries shouldn't get to travel and live in America, even though they're going to commit less crime and bring economic good, because the whiteys in their suburban neighborhood might feel less trustful because they saw a person with a turban like move in next door.
I'll tell you this.
I am so unimaginably not concerned. It just seems like such a trivial concern.
I understand what you're trying to say. And I'll tell you this. If you guaranteed that these populations that are coming in are not going to be causing harm, that the harm that they will be causing regarding trust will be, marginal, it will be very small, then absolutely go for it. I see no problem. But
we already have data on crime rates.
Excuse me?
We already have data on crime rates. They will commit less crime than.
That's part of the data, but okay.
Well, just than the Americans already here.
I mean, this could seem like an essentialization, but for example, and once again, I don't mean to say that. Are we speaking about immigrants or refugees?
Well, there aren't really any refugees in America, and also the UK didn't
I was going to give a UK example.
Well, the UK also didn't really take refugees during the Syrian refugee crisis, did they?
I think they did take a few thousand, but
a few thousand. So they took like none, right? Like. Whichever group you want to refer to, just be specific about the group. But I'm talking about immigration here. Refugees shouldn't happen. Like, they're a product of a bad circumstance politically. Immigration will always happen everywhere because people want to travel and move.
Okay. Well, I was going to cite an example, but I don't think it's really going to prove anything. It's just going to make me look bad.
You don't need to worry about the optics here. It's just... I just have to wonder, like, if the evidence indicates that immigrants are less dangerous than like Americans who already live here. I keep saying Americans, but like the data can be applied pretty broadly, and I think in liberal democracies, Germany's crime rate went down even after taking in refugees, who are, I think, on average, a less actualized group civically than like immigrants are going to be, because they're fleeing violence, they have fewer things to come with. It's nice. I have to ask, have you been to like a big multicultural city and like lived there for a while?
I've lived in Miami. I don't know if you consider that. I've lived in London as well.
Okay, well, London's far more multicultural than Miami is. I just when you look at when you look at cities like London or Los Angeles or New York, do they have their problems like with poverty and crime? Yeah, but usually it's not with immigrants. It's usually like with the ethnic minorities that the government's been like sweeping under the rug for centuries before. These cities are towering accomplishments to modern ingenuity and civic accomplishment. Like you say that multicultural societies are less stable. America is very multicultural, and also we're the strongest country on the planet. The UK is one of the strongest countries on the planet, and it's also very multicultural. If you look
The
around
United
the
States has
world,
been both the countries that you mentioned have been very powerful states much before they were you could accurately consider them multicultural societies. The U.S. is only well, it's of
if
course
you
it's
asked
always
Ben
had a degree
Franklin,
of
they would have been multicultural as soon as the German
Excuse me?
immigrants. If you asked
Oh,
Ben Franklin, they would have said they were multicultural the moment they let in the German immigrants, back in like the early 1800s.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could argue that. I guess, yeah, I would concede to that. But when it comes to the England example, for example, I don't think you can make the case you can make for Black Americans where they have been systematically oppressed by the government and thus engage in certain conditions that are, product of their socioeconomic conditions and so on. I don't think you can really make the case that for England. Because I mean, these groups have been living here they've been living here for 30 years, maybe some less, some maybe a bit more. But
What about the Irish?
the Irish, where
The Irish. There are a good number of Irish
in
people.
England or in the U.S. or in Ireland.
Well, I mean, Northern Irish people are in part of the UK. I imagine there are a good number of Northern Irish across England as well, just because you are so close to each other. I mean, y'all genocided the Irish. You killed millions of them through enforced starvation. Just a couple of decades ago, prominent English writers were writing on the inherent genetic inferiority of the Irish, saying that their IQ was 20, 30 points lower, that this was some inherent fundamental difference. And the
True.
Irish were, in London and other parts of England, and in Ireland itself, as relegated to the rejects of society as Black people are in America. In some cases, it's very different circumstances. I only mean to say there's a comparable type of social discrimination in some respects there. But
how can you compare these populations then, populations like Irish, and I'm not sure about the crime statistics of Irish people in the UK, but how can you compare a population that was genocided in this way to populations like immigrants from different parts of, once again, different parts of the third world that do commit very violent actions. Because from what I've seen in England, at least,
how?
All these acid attacks, all this knife crime, all this gang violence that's been taking place recently is very much a product. You wouldn't see this nearly to the same scale before mass immigration came into.
Do you have the stats
UK.
on this violent? Wait, hold on. I'm pretty sure that crime rates in the United Kingdom are much lower than they were in the 70s. I'm pretty sure that if you include what was going on at the Irish border, Northern and Southern Ireland, the Troubles,
I think that's a misrepresentation.
isn't it? I'm pretty sure the Troubles would have entailed a much greater crime rate, and the UK includes Northern Ireland. I mean,
yeah, if you included that, yeah, but that's like directly a conflict. What I'm trying to say is
Wait,
like
how
in
is
terms
that?
of civic society.
That is civic. That was in Northern Ireland. That was crime committed as a product of cultural differences.
But that was a crime, if I'm not mistaken, that was a crime committed because there was a major separatist movement going on, and there was this rage coming from a neighboring country. Of course, you're going to expect higher rates of violence to come to. But if you discarded that group of people, or that incident is a better way to put it, if you discarded that incident, I do believe that, and from what I've read as well, and I could do a quick search, that crime in large metropolitan areas and generally in the country has gone up, correlated to mass immigration and people coming in from drastically different cultures, and cultures that in many cases tend to agree with some of the ideas that are taking place.
So right now, crime is, I think, from what I'm looking at, nearly half of where it was in 2002. It looks like we've had a bit of an uptick in 2015 and 2016 that's held stable since then. And I think that uptick can be found to be proportional to a broader increase in the rate of crime in many other countries in the area, not just in Western Europe, but like in the world broadly, you know, sometimes there are global trends to take into consideration. Like, is this, I don't know, like, and then how many of these crimes are even committed by immigrants? Like, you talk about like acid attacks. What percentage of violent crimes in the UK are acid attacks? Like, is this like real sociological analysis, or is this fear mongering driven by conservative media? That's the thing that concerns me when we talk about stuff like this, is that if you go up to the average American and you ask, hey, do you feel like we're living through a violent crime wave right now? Most Americans will say yes. But then if you go ahead and look at like what the actual stats are, that's not true. You know, like people's perceptions of this are mostly a product of the media they consume, not of actual lived reality.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, that does make sense as well. If I'm being honest, you mentioned something. I just forgot it for a moment. You'd mentioned something. Well, I can't remember now. There is contrasting evidence on both sides that suggests that, yeah, as I would say, society has, for example, when was the Syrian refugee crisis? Yeah, the crisis. It was in 2015, right?
I think the migrants hit in 2015. I think it all started in 2014.
Well, I'm seeing a chart right now, and of course there are contrasting sources, but I'm seeing a chart right now regarding sexual offenses recorded by the police in England and Wales, and there is a massive increase after 2015. I mean, before 2015, around 2011, you're seeing maybe, what's this, like 53,000?
Or prosecuted?
According to, excuse me?
Reported
Police
sexual offenses or convicted sexual offenses?
Let me take it says police recorded sexual offenses at their highest volume since the introduction of the NCRS in 2002. It's just police recorded sexual offenses. I don't know if what that refers to specifically.
Could I see the data? Just DM it to me on Discord.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if there are any changes to the law. I'm going to assume that there weren't, just for the you know. Let me see. UK sexual crimes here. UK sexual assault over time. Let's go by that. Rate of sexual assault over time. Did you send it over? Yes, you did.
I sent it over, and I'm going to send the picture of the particular graph because I think it's a study, so it would be like hard to, you know, pinpoint.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. Okay. Let's see. 22% increase incidence. While crime has fallen over the long term, the short term picture is more stable, and most types of crime staying at similar levels to 2016. Too early to indicate whether or not this takes a change. And then we have police recorded sexual offenses. Police recorded sexual offenses. Oh, there's an overlap here. At their highest volume, total other sexual offenses and rape. They go up like this. Year ending 2003 through March ending 2017. I wonder if the methodology listed here is provided. Let's see. You can find the uptick if I simply scroll through. Is it? Volume of violent crime here. How does this go? Total violence. That's improvements. Police recorded crime data. Okay, this has to be these can't be convictions then, right? Otherwise they wouldn't say police. Police aren't the ones who report convictions. The courts do.
I'm not sure, to be frank.
The police would report police reports, and police reports are filed by people who are concerned. So this data is worth looking at. I'm not saying that it's worthless or anything, but this is one of the things that makes me very careful about analyzing stuff like this. So when we talk about police reported crimes, we're talking about police reports and arrests, you know, all of which can be done without actually getting a conviction, and in a period of time during which there's increased or elevated like levels of concern about like Muslims or like migrant gangs or grooming gangs or whatever. The level of reports and the level of arrests can go up significantly. Now, I'm not saying that means there's no increase. There totally could be. I'm only saying that I'd be interested in seeing like how convictions played out over this time period. I do know the grooming gang stuff was very overstated back in like 2018 and 2019 and stuff, but it's been a while since I've looked at that data.
All right, I see.
Sorry, I'm just running through it. I would have to look at it before I gave a more.
No, it's completely fine. It's completely understandable. We could move on to another a very controversial point that I have. It's regarding culture and this entire idea. I'm sure you'd find it very interesting.
I love culture and also ideas.
Sure. Okay, this is a pretty hot take, I think, and it centers around the idea that black culture and okay, whatever. Black culture in the United States and specifically media. Music.
Sorry, I'm
fine.
gonna have to interject.
I'm fine with
I'm
it
sorry.
if the mods are. It's of no concern to me.
We are not fine with that topic.
Yeah, we're not at all.
All right.
This truly isn't affiliated with the Reddit then, is it?
No, it's really not.
No.
You're dead on. Not the Reddit.
My answer then very broadly is that I love black people. That's my Jesse Lee Peterson answer.
And you're on. We don't want to hear your opinion. All right.
Okay.
No, I
Very good
genuinely
answer,
don't
Vaush.
have any problem. It's a problem of music and shit, but whatever.
It's so I guess the question that I'd have for you, assuming that we're interested in improving the world broadly, because I think I can infer what our disagreement would be here without touching on it directly, is that it seems like there are a lot of problems out there that we know are real and we know we can fix and we know we can make the world better by fixing them. But oftentimes people will go off on adjacent points that we don't know are real. We don't know if fixing them is even possible, if it even is a problem. Like, if you care about crime and trust, why not target income inequality? If you care about ghettoification, why not target housing policies that have kept minority groups in the neighborhoods they tended to arrive in 150 years ago in the United States or in England, you know? If you care about, like, elements of black culture or of misogyny in black culture or, like, individualism or propensity for success in black culture, you know? What we call black pessimism is often a pretty, like, realistic and valid, product of socioeconomic disadvantages that black people, I think, have every right to feel discouraged by. And in terms of, like, the cultures promoted in their music, you know, I feel like the negative elements are heavily overstated. Look at white country music. There's a hell of a lot of misogyny there. Look at rock music from the 80s, like, same. You know, I feel like often we get outraged over this stuff and we say we're worried about income, about trust, about, you know, crime, but are we? Or are we just finding issues adjacent to race and finding ways to build up, like, a proxy argument towards that, you know?
The thing is, I don't know if this is gonna, like, violate what the mods want here, but the thing is, in my case, for example, I don't have any particular. I get what you're hinting at, but I don't have any particular issue with any particular group. I would say, if you, for example, let's talk about misogyny. If there was, or if there is, I'm not very sure about it, a misogyny in country music, then I would agree. I mean, I would give it the same treatment that I would give other types of music in the case that I'm trying to argue. Black music, for example. Black music is very broad. That sounded very racist, but you get what I mean.
I would like to maybe pivot the topic of the discussion to something maybe adjacent to this topic, but
white
similar.
Country music. You know, I've got my problems with white country music, especially modern white country music. I think some of that stuff back from the 1960s is pretty good. Seems like there's been a bit of a corporate takeover, but say you want to make a change, you know, how do you change that? Like, if there are problems in it, like, which are being produced by some forms of corporate media, what can you do to address that?
Regulations and cancel culture.
Regulations, how?
I would regulate, for example, let's say we have a song, right? A particular song that's speaking very badly about certain groups. It's not a very healthy song for society. What I would do in the case if I were, like, Spotify, for example, or in the case of the government, I guess via regulations on Spotify, I would say, yeah, this song needs to get off the top charts, or it needs to, be shadow banned, something along those lines.
Well, I thought individualism and free speech and limited government were essential components of American culture.
Oh,
Like,
but I mean,
censorship seems kind of contradictory.
But don't you think, for example, if a Nazi made a song singing, a bunch of slurs and a bunch of bad things and that sort of thing, would you think it is justified for corporations to remove that song off the charts if it happened to do well, hypothetically?
I think that corporations have terms of service requirements that those would probably run up against. Even if that wasn't the case, I think people have every right to protest it. The line that I would draw would be the idea of the government censoring it. Under no circumstances am I comfortable with the government censoring art, even if that art is politically reprehensible. Though I would say that pro-Nazi music is far more politically reprehensible than like a black guy calling women bitches or whatever. I mean, it's not like the height of progressivism, but I mean, hell, neither are some of the arguments you've made here. If we get too handsy with the government cracking down on all speech we don't like, where does it end?
I mean, for example, there are certain, I mean, to say that like the government doesn't intervene at all in like free speech, I think is just not true. I think that there are interventions here and there. For example, saying phrases like, I'm going to kill the president of the United blah is illegal. That's what I've heard, at least. That's what I've heard. And of course, doing other things, for example, in the case of Germany, I know this isn't Germany, but in the case of Germany, Nazi saluting is illegal, and I'm sure that there might be some sort of hate speech law that prevents, like, I don't know, doing Nazi representation or something like that in culture and in media. I do think that is the case. You may correct me if I'm wrong. However, I do think that it should be the case either way, and I do think that via government regulations you could say, all right, Spotify, why don't you make these are regulations? And of course, it's not going to be some 1984 totalitarian thing. It's just going to be music that, broadly speaking, doesn't try to create internal division or promote the hatred of different groups in a nation, which I think that is the case in many forms of music, or speaks negatively or demonstrably speaks negatively of certain groups. That's just what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I mean, here in the U.S., we don't have hate speech laws. When people are committed when they're convicted of having committed a hate crime, it means that there was a demographically prejudiced element to an existing crime that they've committed. In terms of hate speech laws, I disagree with them. Germany has its own history with Nazism. Obviously, they have room to be more sensitive to that particular issue than I do, and here in the United States. And it's not like the U.S. ain't full of Nazis either, because it sure as hell is and was. But either way, I mean, the issue here is that you're talking about maybe the most defensible elements of the government engaging in censorship, which even then I don't really agree with, but you're using it like, if it's like sexism in a rap song. I mean, the idea of that would be like, can you imagine if we brought about that threshold, what the government would have to censor that isn't that? Basically anything remotely problematic would have to be like just excised from the public record. I mean, that, like, you would have to annihilate, and it wouldn't change people's attitudes towards any of this, mind you. It would foment a lot of public resistance. With respect, I feel like if your solution to a problem you see in culture is let's censor the parts of the culture I don't like, it's a very juvenile, like, gigantic mallet trying to hammer in a nail kind of solution to the problem, right? Like, it would be like the first thing that someone who doesn't know much about politics would say, like, well, what if we banned it, But
I'll give you an example. However, things like cancel culture can be beneficial, and I think you agree. I mean, having people cancel certain types of music and certain types of ideas is good. And evidently,
what do you mean by cancel?
Market. Excuse me.
What do you mean by cancel?
Cancel, like, for example, this celebrity said this completely racist thing. Just cancel them. For example, that's what I mean. Stop.
But that's not state
listening
censorship.
to music. No, not state censorship, but I can make the argument. The argument for government censorship was just one of many. I could make the one for corporate or just for individual people doing it.
Well, that's fine. I agree with that. If your argument is, hey, if there are problematic elements of culture and media, we should protest against it and try to, like, put public pressure on the people and make it, then great, fine. That to me, that right there is free speech. That's the essence of free speech. I'm totally okay with that.
Sure, and inevitably, the way that the free market works, corporations will end up listening to the general voice. I mean, if not, they themselves will get a form of censorship done by the public. This company is allowing, all of this. For example, in the case of, well, I don't know, in the case of the porn industry, for example. If some companies are allowing certain types of content, then people are going to boycott, and evidently the companies following through with the logic of the free market are going to understand that and are going to evolve. And I think that something similar should be done. For example, in the case of corporate, in the case of music, when you have certain types of music that are being like blatantly. Excuse me?
That does happen. People have protested against media they think is inappropriate. You had the Satanic Panic back in the 1980s. You had trying to get rid of video games. Like, what was his name? Thomas, the lawyer, back in the early aughts. You had the comic book code back in the 1960s, I think. This stuff happens all the time. Yeah, people trying to protest against this stuff. But the problem is, like, people just don't mind the misogyny in music that much, you know?
Don't you think, however, that having music that creates internal division in a country, for example, or creates or is hateful towards, I don't know, LGBTQ people or women, for example, don't you think that that's just like socially, that's just a negative thing? And we should seek, as a society, we should seek to, try to not have this music be so prominent. I think that it's inevitable that certain types
It may
of
be
music will
harmful,
inspire.
but the right to do it is beneficial. And I'm okay with social division in a country. I don't like hatred against people, but even though I think that hatred is harmful, the right to engage in it, the right to produce media, which, other people disagree with, which others consider hateful, I think that overwhelmingly the existence of that right is beneficial. Overwhelmingly, it allows us to do good things, and every once in a while there are bad externalities.
Okay, well, I see what you mean. I do see what you mean. I personally disagree. I think that there should be some form of regulation, perhaps in the terms of service, as you mentioned, the terms of the conditions, whatever it's called, as you mentioned. As I don't think it's socially, it's not a good thing to have certain types of content to be allowed and promoted. I do believe in that kind of social regulation. Yeah.
Like, even light misogyny, like saying like
No,
bitch
well,
in
I
the
mean
song.
something so small like that type of misogyny. I guess you could like it could be understood, of course. But when you talk about things like killing each other and fucking kidnapping and stealing, I think that's unacceptable.
Like generally, or
No, in media, and I'm in media that promotes it,
promotes crime.
this type of behavior. Yeah.
Oh,
for
what's wrong with
example.
promoting crime?
Well, I mean, crime is generally the law is made to designate things that are harmful as crime.
Yeah, but isn't the promotion of criminality a component of artistic production that has long defined anti-authoritarian movements? Committing crimes may often be harmful, but if you take a look at media, which, like moral Puritans might argue, promote crime, you're often going to look at anti-authoritarian art. Does Fight Club promote crime? I think it certainly does. What about American Psycho, which doesn't explicitly condemn the alleged behavior of its protagonist? I mean, Taxi Driver, like, there's so much, like, Batman is a vigilante. That is definitely a crime. What about The Punisher? He acts outside the law. All the Tarantino films. It seems like, you care about culture, don't you? It seems like so much of all the wonderful things my country has produced that I care about are Romeo and Juliet entailed breaking the law. It seems like you would have to
It's not
do
just
so
breaking
much
the law.
damage.
I mean, yeah, it is somewhat arbitrary, but I don't think it's just about breaking the law. It's more about, breaking the law in some contexts that promote these ideas. And I think that's evident when you look at certain songs, certain ideas that are produced in certain types of music, not exclusive to quote unquote black cultural music or whatever.
All right, I don't think I see a productive future in this dialogue right now, so I'm going to put a stop to it, and I think we're going to change out a speaker right now, if that's okay by you.
Who is you?
You, Vaush.
Oh, wait, am I being changed out?
No, you are not being changed out.
Oh, I didn't know it was a roulette. Sure. Yeah, I better boot up Elden Ring, or my ADHD hands aren't going to know where to go.
All right.
You're on. I've had a tremendously fun time talking to you.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I'm going to briefly use the restroom while you cycle somebody else in. Just one moment.
All right.
I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Well, that was fun.
All right, 1 second, guys. I'm going to get our next speaker up there.
Could I ask him a question, Mike?
Knock yourself out.
I just have like a 1 or 2 piece question. I don't plan to stay for too long.
All All right.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Vaush. I don't plan to get into a prolonged debate with you. You're obviously very educated on the things you talk about. I have a question that
Nah,
kind
I just talk loud, that's all.
of I have a question kind of rounding back to something you said earlier about kind of talking about culture and you joked about with the Mount Rushmore topic about how you're not really concerned about hurting Whitey's feelings, and that was pretty funny.
Mhm.
But it is kind of inarguable that many majority in like Western countries where the majority of the population is white, there is a sort of reactionary cultural trend happening where many people feel like their culture is degrading. They feel like foreign cultures are being prioritized over their own. They feel like, you know, their world is sort of collapsing and diluting, whereas foreign ones are being promoted. I'm not here to really debate if that's true or not, but many people feel that way. And I think it, you know, it's fun to joke and say that, you know, you don't really care what Whitey feels, but I think this issue does need to be addressed somewhat. So I guess my two-piece question to you is, do you think this is a legitimate concern? And what do you think should be done? Or rather, what do you think is the cause of this? And what should be done to fix it?
Well, I think the cause of it, I mean, historically, if you take a look at where these concerns tend to arise, it's usually when powerful people who have access to media use the existence of different ethnic, national, or religious groups as a way of explaining away problems that are actually caused by some exploitative behavior they're engaging in. So, for example, the fear of minorities or different racial groups stealing jobs from white people is essentially completely manufactured. There's just not data to support it. But its origins stem before the beginnings of modern sociology, at least modern sociological analysis. They stem from, generally, white business owners fear-mongering to their workers that immigrants and former slaves were driving down the cost of labor. That they were scabs. They weren't going to be in the unions, and they couldn't be in the unions, of course, because they weren't white, you know. Essentially, racial fear-mongering was used as a mechanism for denying those workers class consciousness, in my opinion, in my analysis. So I think that we see a similar problem today. For example, wages are stagnating. Why is this? Well, it's not because of Mexicans, that's for sure. There's no evidence of that. But boy, do a lot of people in America believe that there is. They certainly think that's the case. I think we must do what we can to acknowledge and address these concerns, to educate people, to explain why they are incorrect, but we mustn't cede ground to them. If we're to cede ground to every single manufactured controversy, you know, we'll never be able to do anything productive with our country. We obviously, you know, we have to concern ourselves first and foremost with things that are real and true and worthwhile.
Yes, and I would agree because you kind of pointed to more substantive things like jobs. And you're right, like whenever we're talking about culture wars, we're in this very subjective, hard to pin down kind of topic. And you say that this concern, I'm talking more, you know, subjectively over people's perception that their cultures are diluting. I think you're kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of saying that this topic is too subjective to even address because, you know, if we tried to address any sort of or every sort of a subjective complaint that people have, we'd never get anywhere.
Also, there's no such thing as a culture not diluting when a person's definition of dilution is change. Cultures change. Usually when they dilute, it's because of a genocide or like a very specific, like ethnically exclusionary set of policies, an attempt to choke out or to quiet a group of people. But cultures change, and American culture is multicultural. If American culture doesn't include anything non-whites have produced, then American culture is meaningless and vestigial and globally unimportant for the most part. A ton of the culture we produce is a product of our multiculturalism. So when people look at that and say, oh, you know, our culture is being diluted, what they really mean is that they don't like the racial groups that are coming in. You know, with respect, I think that's overwhelmingly what people mean. Like, frankly, I can't care about that because then they're basically just using a fake argument to prop up just completely unjustified racism, which, I only so much I can do with that, right?
Well, again, this is a world of subjectives. Maybe the word diluting kind of had some pseudo-racial connotations. What if we talked more about how people feel like culture is cheapening, or it's becoming, in a sense, more plastic? Would you say that capitalism is at fault for this? Like, the world is becoming more boring or more, drab. The things we do for fun are less fulfilling. Do you think this is like? I mean, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Do you think
and I agree completely. Yeah. And I would blame capitalism. And I know that, and I know that's the reason why, and I know that it's not because of like immigration or, cultural diversity or whatever, because some of the most non-plastic, culturally rich parts of the world are the developing world. Whatever people may want to say negatively about Mexico or India, whatever people may want to say negative about Nigeria or whatever else, you go over there and they are rich with culture because they've not yet been subjected to the totalizing, the hegemonic consumption of capitalist influence, not the way that we have. So in this case, if anything, multiculturalism staves off the plastic. It staves off the denigration. And that's one of the reasons I like it, honestly. I feel like it's much harder for, our culture to feel plastic and cheap and synthetic if it's being influenced by literally like billions of people's worth of cultural effect.
That's a good way to put it. That's pretty much all I had to say, but thank you.
The pleasure's mine.
All right, we had another person that we wanted to get up on the stage, so just give me 1 second here.
I'm in no hurry.
All right, Spicy, are you ready? Well, I guess not.
Uh-oh. Well, like I said, I'm in no hurry. How's your day going?
Yeah, we're just figuring it out. Oh, just splendid. Thank you for asking. One moment here. I'm going to shoot
hello
a
to the
DM.
fine people in general. Chat.
I guess like moralization of multiculturalism, and how that's
We
being
didn't get the
promoted.
first bit there, Spicy.
Hello, Spicy.
Spicy, your microphone, you got to restart what you're saying.
Interesting. Maybe I'll just debate him like this. Get the. It's like he's screaming through space-time, and I'm trying to piece together an argument from it.
It's the ideal way to do it, isn't it?
Oh God, yes. I wish I could. My mic setup's too nice. Hello, general chat. I see you over there in the Discord server. I mean, not my own chat. I don't call that the general chat. How are you doing? Please give me a job. What music do you like? Don't ask me that. Do you play Corruptions of Champion? No, but I know that there's a character there that has my name. United Ireland? Sure, why not?
I cannot hear anything. Did I cut out there?
Uh-oh. Oh, Clash of Clans? Oh. I can't
Hello?
believe I read...
Yes, you did.
I read
I cut out.
COC.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just restart.
No, I'm all right now. I feel like those two things are inextricable. Do you disagree?
What two things?
Multicultural society and the dissolution of culture and capitalism. Sorry. So I guess it's three things, but the dissolution of...
Again, your microphone is not working.
Oh dear, oh dear.
I think you might need to fix your sensitivity for when it's picking things up, because it is cutting out a lot.
I'm very proud of myself for reading COC in the Discord chat, and my first thought was Corruption of Champions, a porn game, and not Clash of Clans, one of the largest mobile games in history. Corruption of Champions is...
Clash of Clans. Can you hear me better?
Yes, we can hear you right now.
Okay. Sorry about that. So my question was whether you think that multicultural society or like global culture is separate in some way from like capitalism, because it seemed like you were wanting to defend like the notion of multiculturalism at the very least.
Well, they're caused, or at the very least, they both push in the same direction, but for different reasons. Capitalism, multicultural societies tend to be capitalist countries because capitalism benefits most from global trade. That is true. But I think it's possible to extract the benefits without the negatives. Globalism is, after all, a good thing. It doesn't have to be capitalist. The socialist version of it would be called internationalism. And I personally, excuse me, at least from what I've seen in the world, both in my country and in others, it seems like a lot of the negative consequences of capitalism, the plasticity of one's culture, it comes about regardless of your immigration policies, you know? Like, it's not as though America would not today have Exxon gas stations, like, running out every single highway exit. It's not like we wouldn't have, like, gigantic monopolistic chain restaurants that are in every single city in our country if we didn't let brown people into our country, you know? Like, all those factors, they're synonymous, they're co-factorial, but they're not literally the same. Does that make any sense?
In to some degree, I would say. Oh, sorry. I think my input has switched again.
I
No, okay,
hear you
okay.
just fine.
Okay. To some degree, yes. Although, I would. My pushback on that is that it seems that capitalism has like subsumed the more.
Oh dear.
Uh-oh.
Is this being done perchance through an Xbox gamer headset? I'm not shaming. I'm just curious.
Maybe.
I'm taking questions from the Discord general chat. Hello, people. Don't ask me any questions which involve acronyms, or I might demonstrate my the thought processes in my head. How are you? I'm doing great. Elden Ring 1 out of 10. It's got to be a 10. Favorite K-pop group? Don't have one. Favorite color? Burgundy. What do you think of Disco Elysium? It's pretty pog. Favorite type of cheese? Blue cheese. Should machine guns be illegal? Sure, why not? Team Skeet or Team Kanye? I have no idea. Sanctions. Oh god, don't ask me real questions. Oh my god.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the Kanye affair right now?
I don't even know much about it. He's acting like a creepy stalker or something? Is that what's happening?
Well, that's what I want to find out from you.
From what I've seen, he's acting like pretty crazy. Yeah, I don't know. Kanye is pretty obviously like mentally ill, right? Is that a hot take? He's like, didn't he literally like get off his meds after his mom died or some shit? I don't know that much about celebrities, but I don't know. Yeah,
So
it seems
Team Skeet.
I guess I might be Team Skeet. Yeah, I guess it shows we have a long way to go with regards to our treatment of mentally unwell people in this country when a massively powerful celebrity essentially goes off his meds and starts harassing people, and the response is to treat it like a public spectacle. I mean, obviously, to an extent, that's what's going to happen because that's how celebrity culture tends to work anyway, but I feel like looking at that, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Would it be weird of me to... I don't know.
What?
Well, it seems to me like, with regards to a lot of issues concerning ableism, people really like having a caricature to point and laugh at. Like, I know, for example,
yes.
Yeah, when I was in high school, like, everyone loved talking about the crazy bitch ex they had, even if I fucking know these guys didn't have any exes, you know? But, like, the archetype, having that type of person to talk about, to laugh at, it seems like it's a really common sort of cultural default, something we all defer to, and having it play out in a mass scale like this, I don't know. Yeah, it seems pretty bad. Well, it seems like it might take that fine fella a little while to figure out his mic situation. Are there any other people in the Discord who would like to speak?
Yeah, we're going to rummage around for a second, right? We're just looking through chat. We're going to vet some people, and I'll get back to you on that.
Gotcha. I'm going to get my ass kicked by this bird boss a bunch of times anyway, so seems like...
Yeah, really all the time in the world.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Pretty sure I'm underleveled for this area, even though I've been leveling for the past, like, 8 hours. Have you played?
I have not.
Gotcha. Ooh. Ooh. Oh, there I am. There I'm dead.
Oh, we might have him back.
Uh-oh.
Spicy?
Now you're in trouble. Or not.
Alas. Well, I hope when Spicy reviews this VOD of mine, they know that I love them. And that I respect their effort.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to be feeling the love in like 48 hours.
Spicy got they, them. I can never keep track of people's fucking pronouns, man. I have no idea. I don't know. Used to be so easy. Now everyone's queer. It's rough out here. If I had a memory, it wouldn't be a big deal. Oh, I should probably pay attention to this bird.
That wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a big bird. It's got like a corset.
There clearly is only one option left. Big Weld versus Vaush.
No, I'm good. I agree
Big
with
Weld.
him.
Oh, thank you, Big
Hi,
Weld.
Vaush. We're gonna get Hawk up here.
Everyone in the general chat is typing in all caps. It's so energetic. They're all so happy to be here. I'm also happy to be here. Okay, I'm gonna try to stay off the horse this time.
Hockey coming up.
All right, I think that we have someone to bring up right now. Give me one moment.
Gotcha, gotcha.
All right, Mock, are you ready to bring him up?
Sorry, who?
I think that our dear not Nick wants to come up.
Ooh. All right, yeah.
I think it's impossible for you to beat it. Alright, the people in my community are gigantic pussies. Jesus Christ. You can beat any in all the From Software games, you can be level 1 with a club and you can beat them. It may be unimaginably difficult, but you can always win. That's all you need.
My first question is, did you play Sekiro and did you like it?
I did.
Since you're playing Elden Ring.
I did
like
play
it?
Sekiro, yes, and I liked it very much. I thought the addition of the stamina bar and all the depth and nuance that added to the combat was like a huge improvement. I'm so glad they added that to Elden Ring.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I really like the game. Okay, a real question. Do you think the strategy of sanctions used by the U.S. on the Russian and Iranian people, not their oligarchs, is a legitimate geopolitical strategy that should be used?
Oh God, you were the person in chat who asked a real question. I suppose the cream does rise to the top here. I guess the point there, I suppose, would be that it's almost impossible to affect sanctions in a way that don't. Almost anything you could do to disrupt an economy of a country is going to affect the citizenry, you know? It used to be the case that wasn't true, you know? Back before, say, like World War II, the difference between maybe not World War II, but back in the day, the difference between a military and a civilian target was very, very, very clear, you know? I mean, it used to be, like, back in medieval times, that armies would literally assemble in great camps and, like, move around the country to like meet and fight other armies. You know, it's like you know what you're doing. But nowadays, obviously, that's just not the case. And it seems really difficult to affect sanctions in a way which are severe enough to affect a country like significantly, but aren't going to affect the citizenry. I think every effort should be made to avoid hurting citizens, and I think after this conflict is over, assuming Russia is appropriately de-toothed, we should provide aid to Russia to help bring its economy back so their citizens don't have to suffer needlessly.
Okay, and I guess my second part of this question is, do you think sanctions are effective? Because you look at a country like North Korea, who's just heavily controlled by a regime that, like the Kim dynasty and its military supporters, have all the power in the country. Is it really fair to put that pressure on its citizens to try and overthrow a government they are massively, helplessly underpowered against? Like, do you think that's a legitimate, fair thing to ask and a legitimate strategy?
Fair? Absolutely not. A legitimate strategy? Unfortunately, yes. This is just up there with, like, warfare, right? If you invade a country, no matter how badly they need invading, there's no way to avoid civilian targets anymore. You can do your best effort, but evading them entirely is literally not possible, just not with the way things work. I don't think it's fair at all. I think it's miserable, and I think that warfare is, in the modern day and age, is just so unimaginably destructive that the first ethical consideration should be, like, crippling countries that have a propensity to engage in it. And in this case, that would be Russia. Like, these sanctions are brutal, and what's happening to the Russian people are brutal, or is brutal, but my hope would be that Russia can be pushed into a position where its leadership understands that there's no benefit to warfare at all, and maybe that in the long run will avoid more harm in the future, you know?
Yeah, I think that's fair. My question about it being viable just more looks like I think a really good example of this is like the former Asian SSRs, the ones that left the USSR, so like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, where regimes are heavily they're some of the most totalitarian regimes in the world, and they've been sanctioned since this totalitarian these tendencies took over, but the governments are still in power.
Yeah, so to that, this requires a lot of specific knowledge that I might not have. I don't want to speak outside of outside of what I know. I would say, though, that if you're sanctioning a country, there has to be a reason you're sanctioning it. It can't just be because the country is authoritarian, you know? I don't think there's any example historically of just general untargeted sanctions. No. Of general untargeted sanctions, like making a country that's authoritarian better. I don't think that's ever happened. And now if there's something specific happening, like there's a war that you're trying to prevent, or there's like a civil war happening, or a coup, or insurgency, or just if you're trying to affect a specific outcome, then I think that could be okay. General sanctions are bad though. Like we're still doing that shit in Cuba, and it's like there's no reason, there's no purpose.
Okay, I think that's fair. I don't know. My question is just about going back to North Korea. I'm not defending North Korea's actions, but do you really think I know you say legitimate reasons to use sanctions. Do we really think that this small country on the other side of the world can feasibly pose a threat to liberal society and justify that as, pouring these massive amounts of sanctions on them?
Well, I mean, I don't think we sanction North Korea as I don't think we do it because we think they pose us a threat. My guess would be we do it because it's part of us maintaining a good relationship with South Korea, which we need because they're like an incredibly important base of operations for us in that theater. In terms of how much of a positive outcome it's going to affect, I'm not really sure. There's a person in my chat saying that the sanctions in North Korea specifically have to do with nuclear de-armament. That it's about preventing the supply of resources to build nuclear weapons. If that's the case, I think that's pretty okay. Pardon my American chauvinism. I'm not really that much a fan of North Korea having nuclear weapons. I'm not a stan for that particular idea. So yeah, I guess it would have to be it has to be done for a specific reason, which that is.
Yeah, I think that, okay. No, that's fair. I can agree with that. I'm really not feeling well, so thank you for answering my questions, but I'm going to go back down.
Take care of yourself.
No problem. See you, man.
Hi, is this audible now?
Hi.
It is.
Am I being heard? Okay, good, better audio quality. Hello. I'll just follow up on what he said because it's related anyways. I was speaking about globalism before, but I would say like the sanctions that we're seeing here, especially from countries that were previously neutral in Europe, such as Sweden and Switzerland, are sort of unprecedented here. And like you said, some of these sanctions can be utterly crippling to the everyday citizen. Do you think it's worrisome that we've also seen not just private institutions, but private institutions that we sort of enthrone, at least legally, as neutral institutions, not like publishers? For example, Facebook changing their policies in relation to hate speech, etc., and blocking Russian news networks. Do you think that's of any concern?
There are some things that I'm okay with and some things that I'm not okay with. Private providers getting involved in sanctions is just a fact of the world, of the modern world. The same thing used to happen with sanctions in the medieval period because mercantile corporations were basically in lockstep with the king or queen they were loyal to. So that stuff definitely has a long-standing precedent. In terms of changing TOS policies or banning Russia today, I would be very skeptical of TOS policy changes broadly. Banning Russia today seems to me to be a largely defensible thing, because it's like enemy propaganda. At least I think it's okay for Ukraine and Europe to do it broadly, but like so many of these problems right now are the product of a multi-decade long like media disinfo campaign from Russia, where they use RT and other platforms abroad to like push a incredibly biased narrative, and that's pretty dangerous. It's essentially a form of information warfare. I don't know. This seems like a shade of lesser evil type situation to me.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Especially like Russia just is pushed like not only the ethno-nationalist narratives about Ukraine, but also like posed the United States as sort of like a alternative bad guy to Ukrainians in the past. Like, oh, we had a puppet government. The U.S. installed a puppet government. We are just like essentially like again like some form of like they are the lesser evil has been propagated through those channels. But legally, these corporations have a sort of Goldilocks zone. They're not actually responsible for the content put out on their platforms, nor are as publishers are, for example. Like people that curate their content have legal responsibilities for the content that is put up on the platforms, such as like New York Times, etc. But as like ostensibly neutral platforms, they do not. They sorry,
not at all. Keep going.
As ostensibly neutral platforms, they have no like legal responsibility and can like no suit can be brought against them for like First Amendment violations, or like, you know, if they were to conduct this sort of like political warfare in any sort of other form. As we saw like during the 2016 election, Russia actually was using Facebook's quote unquote neutral platform to spread their own misinformation. Do you think that's something that needs to be like regulated? I don't know. I have like a heavy investment in this issue. What do you think about that? Yeah,
the issue here is that all my answers are going to come off like I'm a whinging, non-committal asshole, because I genuinely have no idea. It's so incredibly difficult to have a strong answer to this. It seems like you have an unwinnable position on both sides, where on one hand, like in the modern world with the internet and stuff, a nation state or a country with any like real political power is... Who's clicking? What is that clicking?
Oh, me, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it picked up. At least I can hear you at all. It seems like any nation state or like big corporation is capable of basically completely controlling the narrative on their own if they are if they're given the ability to, if they're given like free reign, free speech and all that. And then on the other hand, like it seems like there's basically no way of divvying up acceptable levels of censorship if you were to try to prevent that specifically from going overboard. I don't know if I have a strong answer. It's really tough to manage.
Yeah, I would say that's very true. Like, so proliferation of social media has resulted in like so many almost unsolvable things. You know, mythologies get spread out about many people. In fact, I almost know nothing about you other than the like, I guess like fallacious argument that I see all the time on Twitter, calling you like a pedophile. So I have to ask, what was the context of the clip that resulted in that infamous?
Got me in a room, huh?
No.
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
We're not clip farming further.
No.
If you want to look, there are actually videos on my channel that you can find. The very non-specific gist of it, for the sake of the Discord, the fine people here. The very specific gist of it is that there was a position I was taking, which is broadly agreeable, anti-bad things, that I attempted to devil's advocate people into defending their contradictory position against it. Essentially trying to bait other people into taking a bad position by indicating that they were hypocritical for disagreeing with me when they had a bad position themselves that was kind of ideologically comparable. The problem with playing devil's advocate for extremely contentious and very emotionally loaded issues is that rather than engaging with it directly, people will just point and laugh at you for playing the devil's advocate. So that's my optics cross to bear. You know, they crucify me, but I built the cross. So how can I complain? That's the gist of it.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. It's just really inappropriate.
All right, so I think that we're going to try and wrap this up soon. So if we want to get anyone that wants to come here for just last questions, we can do that, and then we will finish out.
Hello?
All right,
Yes.
hello. You're up.
Yeah, you guys hear me?
Howdy.
So a pleasure speaking with you, Vaush. I'm Boomer Hawk, usually right now currently Punished Hawk for reasons. I'm the admin of Middleism. Follow my IG page, please. I have some questions for you, pretty much going back to multicultural socioeconomic factors. I personally view social inequality in the United States mostly as there is race-based, but it could be better solved by using class form actions, essentially by using, saying, everybody approaching under this income level gets help, not excluding any ethnic groups or pretty much disadvantaging people by just race.
Mm-hmm. And this is the position which you are front. Okay, yes. I generally agree, mostly because class can be empirically divided and race can't. If you're to target like class-based issues, it's very, very, very easy to like point specifically like which income levels, you know, what like net wealth, you know, what total level of asset acquisition, stuff like that. It's very easy to point at that. Race, it's not. It can get a little bit more abstract. Another thing is that in the United States, people are very hostile to race as a concept being recognized because we live under a mythology of post-racial equality, you know? Like Americans, at least culturally, often like to act as though there is no more racism, and that pretending, in their mind, pretending that there is somehow some kind of faux pas, like you're failing Dr. Martin Luther King by acknowledging racism or some shit like that. I don't know. But nobody does this with classism because Americans don't even know what classism is. They think that discrimination against poor people is just the way the world works, which it is under capitalism. So, yeah, broadly speaking, I just think it's easier to target stuff in a class sense, but I don't think there's anything morally wrong with, like, targeted racial reparations. 40 acres and a mule and all that. There are plenty of good directions one could take there if it was possible to affect them politically.
I would agree with you on saying a class approach probably the best approach because it's probably the most universally accepted approach, as pretty much if poor African Americans, Latinos, or whatever social minority, that group that got affected negatively, if we were to say only they get help, realistically, there would be backlash. There is reactionaries in the United States. By using the class approach, which I feel neoliberals use as race as a dividing factor to hurt people, and by using the class approach, we can actually lift these disadvantaged people who are more, not by saying we can also help white poor people, and we can help poor blacks, poor Latinos, poor whatever Latino, poor minority group, whatever it is, and it actually rises up the whole class in general, and without negatively hurting people.
Yes, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Also, you make things a little bit more politically viable because people tend not to get as angry at divisions within class being sort of the separating line. Or to put it another way, whatever line you would draw to determine who would be the beneficiary of a race-based, like, policy or reparations or whatever, like, so is one person like 1/100th too white to benefit, you know? Like, if you do the whole lineage math, like, people are going to get very mad over that. It's going to lead to a lot of problems. If the government passes a bill and it's like, okay, if you make $30,000 a year or less, then you're in. While that would still lead to people being cut off arbitrarily at the $30,000 mark, it wouldn't encourage that much antagonism.
I would agree. Quick question.
Yeah, I love questions.
How would we have to bring up more of a class approach in America? Would you say, like, let's just say bringing up breaking points? Are they a good way of approaching it, or would it be more like, because the mainstream media is not is refusing to bring it up. They're constantly bringing up racial issues to constantly divide us.
I don't think that the media brings up racial issues to divide us. I think the media just brings up whatever issues get at the most ratings at the time. Same with breaking points. For instance, breaking points I don't think is a particularly good advocate for class issues because they are constantly excusing non-class-based problems under the mantra of addressing class-based issues, you know? Saga Rangetti, I do not believe for one whit that man is interested in improving the lives of poor people. And I have my own positions on Crystal Ball. I think that what you need to do is something like what Bernie Sanders did, and I have a lot of respect for how he handled this. Bernie Sanders never downplayed racial issues. He never downplayed gender or sex issues either. But his overriding position, his strongest argument, his focus was always the class stuff. And I think that when he spoke on those issues, he was very universal in his appeal. Even conservatives kind of begrudgingly respected him, I think. But he could do it without downplaying the other stuff. And I think that's very important.
I completely agree. I have a quick question for you. So, one of the topics as a Latino man, I personally, I tend to lean very left on social economics issues. I'm like, and social issues, I tend to be more conservative. And I have this very deep issue with the word Latinx. And as many of the server know, I personally find it very disrespectful in a weird way, saying like, as another culture coming in and saying, your word is wrong, we're culturally correcting it. And I feel a large amount of Latinos who feel very disaffected by this word, they turned off politically, the same. We're not interested. You're just telling us what to do. Would you say the word Latinx is actually more harmful to the Latino community or actually helpful?
No, I think it sucks. It really does feel like it's a term that was created by white progressives who are uncomfortable with gendered language. And like it seems like its broader use and adoption has very little to do. It's like white people telling other white people that Latin people appreciate it, you know? Like that's the vibe that I get, and it seems really patronizing. And yeah, it's pretty bad advocacy. I don't know. Like because this is pretty, most progressives would consider that problematic if they stepped back and thought about it for a second. Like, creating a term for another group of people they're generally uncomfortable with or didn't ask for because you're not comfortable with the provisions of their language. I don't know. Imagine if we did that shit with like Chinese or something. You know what I mean? Like, imagine if like we started like rewriting Chinese words and names that had Ching or Chong in it, and we were like, hey, listen, okay, well, racists will say Ching Chong to make fun of Chinese people. And then, like, I imagine the Chinese people would be like, okay, well, sometimes we say that. Sometimes, you know? Like, you can't... Like sometimes they are a part of a word. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I completely understand. It's like, I feel like there's... Essentially, progressives can do so much more with Latinos, especially with saying, like, if they drop that word. It's like, I've seen so many Latinos say, don't say that word. I'd rather be called the B word than that. And I'd rather be called the B word than that. Realistically, because I just feel like.
Oh, are you inviting me to?
Oh, you go ahead. Dude.
No, I won't.
Go ahead. I don't care. I'll laugh it off because I don't even classify it as offensive slur anymore.
I won't though. Just asking.
But I would just say that I feel it's progressive are probably trying to be so in a weird way woke, or I'm not sure how to term it specifically. Is they're trying to be so out there, trying to be pushing the new level. They're actually not being connected to the actual issues with people. If like Latinos just feel like we're on board with whatever you're saying, but the moment you start using that, you're just kind of losing us.
Just keep in
mind. Do you
mind.
think there's any pushback for that? Like I would say, I was on board with Elizabeth Warren for a long time. Then she said Latinx. I'm like, I don't know about that.
I would keep in mind, you know, there's no such thing as the progressives. There is only progressivism, you know. If you see elements of this bad behavior in like white progressives, try not to think ill of all progressivism or of all progressive causes or of everything progressive a person who says that might have to say, because what you're referring to right there is itself like a problematic element, you know? Like, imagine being like a freed slave back before the Civil War in America, and you like look at the abolitionist groups, and like, hey, an abolitionist, that's pretty great back then. Like, that's better than a lot of people. But like, these people were still racist as shit, like most of them, you know? So while I feel like when you look at that, like when you think like, okay, well, these people broadly have good positions, but this right here, like clearly it's not good enough. The response to that shouldn't be disillusionment. It should be, we still have so much work to do. You know, like we still have that much farther to go, you know? And obviously that can be exhausting. I'm not saying you shouldn't feel bothered by it. Only that like, I would encourage you to take a broadly optimistic attitude towards those failings, because even their existence is evidence of some progress, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I'll give my turn up for everybody else.
The pleasure is mine.
I think we're going to close out the debate right now.
Please follow Middleism on IG.
Please follow Middleism on IG.
All right,
if you want to.
So, give me one moment.
How you feeling, Vaush?
I'm feeling pretty good. Wait, is there a dude sitting here? Wait, did I? Oh. Okay, there's a logo here. I thought I saw the shade of that giant. Okay. Whew. I'm getting Elden Ring brain. Oh my god. I'm doing good. I killed a boss while we were talking. You saw.
All right, so I just want to
nice.
thank all of the people that came up to speak today and give their time and their energy and went in good faith and tried to have a discussion, even if it wasn't always super productive.
I had fun.
And I'd like to thank you, Vaush, for coming on here and discussing
You know, if
whole
you've
range
seen-
of things with everyone.
If you've seen much of my content, that you could probably recognize that these conversations are actually quite productive compared to the sort of stuff I normally do.
All right, then I'd like to thank everyone for the productive conversations
Likewise.
today. And do you mind if I do a plug real quick?
Of course.
Go on Instagram and follow at the _political_compass. And other than that, feel free to join the server. Anyone that wants to come on over here. And
Yeah, I have to say,
I want to extend an invitation to you as well to come on here and do this again with albeit more prepared people.
I would be delighted to do this in the future, and I think well of the character of the people who have been spamming general. They seem like a good, fine bunch of shit posters. I did think that this Discord community was associated with the subreddit at first. I'm sure you get that a lot. So I was fully expecting, a bunch of Nazi shit posting. But no, all the people over there seem quite nice. I would be more than happy to speak in the future.
I would say there's a lack of Nazi shit posting on this server.
That's my favorite amount
of
it.
There is one final question that everyone in general chat is demanding to be asked, and I'll be crucified if I don't ask it. So if you don't mind me going ahead. Someone would want to hear your opinions on pornography and sex work.
That is a very broad question.
It is.
Is this a meme? Like, is there a funny meme answer I give, or is it a sincere interest in my perspective?
This is a sincere question.
Oh, sure. I think that pornography has a fairly negative relationship with a lot of people because we have a fairly negative relationship with sex. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with pornography. It's an art form. Obviously, it's a very specific type of art form, but, fine, whatever. I think a lot of it is boring because it's produced by hacks and it's all very repetitive, but, there's a lot of room for artistic exploration and development there. In terms of, like, how harmful it is to people, I feel like we could have broadly more positive relationships with pornography if we had a more positive relationship with sexuality as a concept. And I feel like sex workers are a part of that world, Sex work is the oldest profession. At least it's often called that. I don't really know if that's true, but it's definitely pretty old. And what's more, it seems to me like a fairly normal and natural thing to exist, right? Like, if you think about it for 10 seconds, like, hey, people like having sex, and some people, and sometimes they can't have sex, but sometimes there's a person who'll have sex for you, but you have to give them $100. It's like, okay, everything there tracks. I get that. That follows. Obviously, the sex work, the industry as it exists in the world today is clearly not a good one. There's obviously a lot of exploitation, a lot of negativity. I think that in a very only $100. Shut up! I just said okay. I feel like in a good world, being a sex worker would be tantamount to any other kind of like physical service profession, like a physical trainer or like a masseur. Obviously, that's very idealistic. It's not like we can snap our fingers and change everyone's attitudes towards sex. But I think that in that respect, it is equally noble. And that is that it is a service which can be performed with little or with great skill, and it's something that people want, something other people are capable of and willing to provide, something that we have a bad history with, but maybe could have less of a bad history with in the future. I don't know. I'm very optimistic about the role of all these things theoretically in the future. I guess it's just a matter of building a world where that optimism is reflected in these industries, and where we don't adopt and internalize the worst characteristics of pornography and sex work as they exist now, and think of them as essential elements of the fields.
All right, so I'm just gonna scan for any follow-ups real quick, and otherwise, I think we're gonna close out. All right, so I think we
May I respond to
are
somebody?
good to. Oh, sure. If you want to go into the general chat there, you can pick something out.
Of course.
Dangerous as that may be.
So this person says, I do not think he is right. It helps perpetuate the notion that women and children are a commodity. So with respect, I have no idea what this has to do with children. Children should not be involved in any of these industries. And also, not just women. I mean, men have and can do... There are also men in porn. I've seen them, you know. They are there. I know that much. But I don't think it has anything to do with commodities. I'll tell you this much, okay? Your body is as much of a commodity when you're doing work in a coal mine as it is while you're, like, giving head to some guy, you know? If you strip away all cultural preconceptions, in either case, like, people sell their bodies all the time. But we only use the term selling our bodies when we're referring to sex work because we have really caught up, like, moral norms that pertain to that, which I think are really, really harmful because a lot of those moral norms are the same reasons why people get slut-shamed or why people get, like, raped, for example. The attitudes that we have towards sex, its exclusivity, and its sort of, relationship with moral virtue, these are things that have historically been pretty harmful, and they're pretty well ingrained into, like, sort of cultural Christian sex negativity. But I think we
There's
can
a
fix that.
follow-up in general chat, by the way, from the same person.
Uh-oh. Let me... Hold on.
Yes.
Beep, beep, beep. Hold on. It is unfair to compare sex work to other work when using the argument that all work is exploitative unless it's fine as a means to survive. Other professions do not lead to systemic abuse and increased violence towards a whole gender. Wait, hold on. So there are a couple of problems here. First of all, I think the current mode of capital relations is exploitative. Work, as in things people do for each other and for society, is an inextricable component of human civilization, and so has sex work. So has sex work been for quite some time. Additionally, other professions do not lead to systemic abuse and increased violence towards a whole gender. Anastasia, I promise you, the rates of violence against women were higher before internet pornography existed. Think about this for a second. Do you seriously think if you were to chart existence of pornography and violence against women on a line graph, you would see both of those correlate? Or would you find that women were raped and sexually assaulted infinitely more back in the day, and now we have internet porn? It is true that pornography can lead to negative social externalities, but these are usually a reflection of the negative values we have towards women and sex broadly. You'll see the same thing in movies which are exploitative, or songs which are misogynistic, or music videos which have women just as set pieces to dance while their titties jiggle, you know? What you're fighting against here is broad cultural misogyny, not some inherent externality, some inherent external factor of pornography. Has there been a follow-up? I only ever look at the comment.
Knowing this user, there is going to be a follow-up.
I kind of got that impression. Anyway,
typing.
Okay. Well, no matter how you want to parse it, there are problems to address here, but the attempts to blame misogynistic violence on sex work and pornography strike me as very strange, not only because they're unsustainable through data, but also because the idea that we should ban an industry because that industry means that people can go online and see people having sex and that leads to violence against women means that there's some sort of underlying factor that you're missing, because seeing people fuck online shouldn't make people commit violence against women. Like, isn't that, like, the actual problem, if that makes any sense? Like, the patriarchy, you know? Because in a vacuum, I don't see... inherently, there should be no relationship at all between people put videos of them fucking online and violence towards women. In a better world, it wouldn't be an issue. Or less of an issue. You know, there's always some problem to deal with, but...
I think they're working on a response right now.
Yeah, I'm getting worried. I can only respond so much. If they want to get on VC, by the way, you know, I know that the poor moderators are worn and battle scarred, but
we'll get by.
Gotcha. Well, I suppose let me know when she responds. Because it's hard for me to keep track. How the fuck do I get down to this beach?
They just said the problem of pornography is it is a tool of the patriarchy.
Well, so is all media in a patriarchal society. I don't think that sex work is inherently any more negative towards women than literally any other form of media. I think they're that's a boss arena? Don't tell me that. God damn it. Well, how do I get down there anyway? Just because it's a boss arena doesn't mean I can't get down there. Rough out here, huh? I'm unable to talk. I don't speak English well. Oh, okay. All right. Well, no forcing people to debate if they don't want to. Yeah, look, I would encourage you to... should I be spicy? Yeah, okay. I think you're misogynistic. Violence against women and misogyny broadly is a ubiquitous cultural problem that existed well before pornography did. And I feel like by externalizing that violence and that misogyny and putting it on an industry, rather than like addressing its broader social form, is kind of a way of, I don't know, scapegoating. It reminds me a little bit of the people who are like, okay, well, I'm against crime, so let's talk about culture. Does that make any sense? Like, you can address the direct... You can address the direct problem there if you want to, you know? And historically, like, anti-sex work arguments have been very, very harmful to women. If you care about the harm done to women through sex work or pornography, like, there are actual policies you can pass that, like, you know, advocates within those industries care about. But overwhelmingly sex-negative or anti-sex worker feminists, what do they call them, SWERFs, are like, exist to the detriment of those groups. And oftentimes, like, let's be real, it's just a form of, like, it's like a moral panic, you know? Like, there are a lot of feminists out there who think, oh, you know, we could have feminism if it weren't for all these hussies who are out here showing their tits off online and therefore making men violent against us, which entails a very biased way of thinking, in my opinion. I would encourage you to speak to female sex workers because I assure you, like, there are better ways of handling these issues. Okay, sorry. I'm just rambling.
All right, so I think that you've given us wonderful food for thought for a potential follow-up debate, and I want to, I guess, do a second closing out.
Yeah, one more time. One more time for...
Yeah, one more round. It's an encore for us. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, VOWSH, for your time, and thank you for the debaters. And I guess thank you to Anastasia for giving us one of the better questions of this entire debate, although it wasn't really immigration, but, you know, here we are. So again, if you're down for another debate, you can get in contact with us and we'll send a message to you and we'll make it happen.
Thank you very much for having me on.
I just want to clarify one more thing. Yeah, of course, it's our pleasure. Just clarify one thing. Like, the users that are in here does not represent the views of everyone of this server as a whole. So
don't worry. I
think that's an important thing to put out there into the internet. All right. This is a group of individuals. This is not a hive mind.
If I might ask, because I understand there are pressures involved here. Like, how much effort does it take to keep the server clean? You know what I mean? I know the connotations.
I do it.
And how much work does that take?
It's not a lot.
Really? Goodness. I'm envious. Well, all for the better then. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, anytime. All right. So thanks for everyone being here, for listening and engaging and spending your time sharing it with us. And take care.
Take care.
I'm going to close it out now.
Okay, well, I totally expected that whole server to be like a Nazi server, so I have to admit I'm pretty surprised by how all that went, but I enjoyed those conversations a lot. So, yeah, okay, I'll definitely be on there again in the future. Those were pretty good convos, I think. What level are you now? Like 75 or something? I don't know. That was good. I don't think that first person. Hey, Shu. Did the mods seem uptight to you? I like the mods. You know, they're no funny business type mods. Lamp moths, what the? You have been so kind to me lately. Thank you so much for the $300. I really appreciate that. If you're feeling stressed out, I'd suggest shower, bath, blankets, burritos, comfort food, video games, getting some fresh air and sleep. Take care, please. You forgot Elden Ring, my friend. Don't you worry. I'm well situated to manage my my stress and my drama. Thank you so much for the incredible kindness. I really appreciate that. Goodness. You gonna fall? Okay, there we go. Seriously, thank you. Jesus. Anyway, I don't think that first kid we talked to was a Nazi or whatever, you know? I feel like they were a fine person and I was just arguing against, like, I feel like I was arguing against the shadows of a bunch of, like, skeptic talking points I've heard. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I didn't get the impression from him that he was at any point during that being malicious. Do you guys know what I mean? Like, you ever get the vibes when a person is, like, saying stuff that is kind of dog whistly, or they're dog whistly talking points, and it comes off, like, so slimy. Like, they're so obviously trying to slip it by. And then there are people who say it, like, you know, just, like, kind of drop those dog whistles, but they just seem like they're just talking, you know?